bad. I ain't been doing too many videos because bullshit that's going on. It's like wow we when I think about how well of a lie we have been taught to believe in. It hurts me. It really, 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 really hurts me when I think about how well this lie has been told to us. It hurts me because when you look at the lie, the lie got so many holes in it, and you can see it now. How we not be able to see through a lie that's right there in front of our eyes for us to see? That's what's fucking me up. It's fucking me up big time. When the lie that's been perpetrated to us start off with robbing our mother out of her glory of being the only conscious thinking creator on this earth. Our daddy is nothing but a donator to our mama being the original creator. Because we was taught some bullshit in how this shit worked. So what we're gonna lay up there and talk about today, because today is Saturday, the divine creator's resting day. Think about that. Why do people celebrate, worship the divine on Sunday when it's Saturday? See the lies that's been perpetrated to us to believe in? Every time I think about the Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy, I go all the way back to that God and that Jesus bullshit. Because to those of you who do know me, know the truth is the truth, and it's in us all at the same time. That's what makes it so divine. But back to what I'm saying. It is what it is when you know what you know, and you're not believing in some bullshit that you know that you was taught as a child. Like the God and the Jesus bullshit. Once again, yes, there is a divine creator that loves us all unconditionally. That's one way all day, every day, that's love to never hate or destroy anything. But it is what it is when it comes down to us being humans living here all together. Not one together, two together. Because two is always better than one. When the divine creator loves the feeling that's unconditional when it's coming from the only one. Divine creator of you being in you for you to be a creator too. But the truth is just that. The motherfucking truth. We was taught to be stupid as fucking sheeple. We was taught not to know what the divine truth is within each and every one of us all at the same time. We was taught to be confused in all the bullshit, to not know the divine, to just believe in all the fucked up, stupid ass stories, to not give the glory to the creator of you having a heartbeat. When I say to you to think for yourself, people lie. The numbers don't. Close your eyes. What do you see? You see total darkness until you open your eyes to see. It is what it is. The truth is the truth. The divine creator that loves you unconditionally is in you, giving you life, giving you free will, giving you choices to choose to go the Creator's one and only willing way is to love. Never, ever, 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 ever hate. But you can dislike a lot. I'm just saying. Hate is a word that's too heavy on the heart. And the heart is the only part of us within us that's truly smart. Because it always do what it's supposed to do. It always pumps the blood throughout the body. It never sucks it. And when you think about your heart, you gotta think about something. When do it skip the beat? When do it act up on you? It's when you're doing something that's not true to the divine creator within you that loves you to the point where you should never get upset. Why? Because you can think about people and what they was created to do because they was never told the truth about what the love is within them. So therefore they was taught to be stupid. So you can give them a pass, but tell them that the shit that they're doing is stupid. And explain it to them how stupid the shit is that they're doing is. When you call it out for being what it is, stupid. But like I said again, for you to get upset and hate and not know what hate is, to be upset about hate, think about it. It makes you stupid. Because when you look at why hate on anything, when you know it's heavy on the heart, and that's what you're going to be weighed by and judged by, and who you think you're going to be judged by with. You're not going to be judged by some God or some Jesus or none of that bullshit. You're going to be judged by your heart, by the only one that can judge your heart the best. And that is you. Because the Creator is never going to put you in no place where you do not deserve to be, because the shit that you do in the circle of life is the truth. It's all on you. We got to stop being stupid as we was taught to be and start being the divine creator that the Creator is in us to be. We're not kids no motherfucking more. Because when you think about that God and that Jesus bullshit, you get the picture of Santa Claus and you get the picture of some white dude, Jesus. Y'all just turned him to be whatever color y'all want it to be. That's the lie and the bullshit. Because the divine creator of all that has been created and is being created as we speak and will be created after we destroy all the things that we created in this bitch. At the end of this journey, the Creator gonna create elsewhere. Because when you look at the truth being just that, the truth, a lot of you motherfuckers just don't care. Y'all only care about the people that you know. You don't give a fuck about the people that you don't know. And that isn't the true heart of the divine Creator that's in all of us to be loving, caring people. So, to the show. Let's go. Here we go. I want y'all to check this bullshit out here. This the truth too. Let's see what we working with here.
I am alone. These words resound and cascade with a depth of meaning that perhaps even the greatest philosophical minds of the ages often dared not tread due to the philosophical minds of the ages often dared not tread due to the astounding implications of what this thought means in terms of the absolute.
Fair use,
The
motherfuckers.
absolute
Fair
being
use.
the most significant topic that
I'm
has
teaching here,
captivated,
but I'm
enthralled,
also showing you the
inspired,
truth.
and obviously
Look at all that
created
light.
rancor in the minds
Just
of
think of
mankind
all the
throughout
lights
the
and the
ages.
lines being
God.
all of us being in line with the light and not no God
God as absolute,
bullshit.
without
The Creator
beginning
is
nor end.
absolute. Just think of it like that.
It is practically impossible
It
to even
is
imagine
the
this.
Creator,
For as
not God.
Schopenhauer
That's
once
man-made
said,
up
every
bullshit.
person
We
takes the limits
created
of
that
their
man,
own field of vision
made up
for the limits
God
of the
and
world.
Jesus
How much
and
more so
Yah
then
and
would
all
we
the
say
different
we
names
miss in
that we
regards to
gave to the
unlimited?
Creator that is what it is. No name. Because when you look at the only name or word you can ever say in vain would be to tell somebody you love them and you don't feel the same that can rock the whole world.
Viewpoint, which is called perspective. A perspective that is a small piece of that absolute. A speck that has been taken or created from the all, but is not to be mistaken as the all. So mote it be. Though any of us may reason through a question or an inquiry, no one individual can encompass the entirety of all that is or ever will be, since that is a matter of capacity. Does a drop know it is in the ocean?
And see, like, with what this guy is talking about, it's ironic for me to even be magnetized to this, to even be able to explain this to you. It's all because of the truth being the truth. It all comes from the divine creator of me having a mind and it being divine and me having a peace of mind to love you with. So like I say, love is the only word you can say in vain. It's when you tell somebody you love them and you don't feel the same. It could change the whole world when you find out that you lied to them. Love is the key to eternal life and eternal bliss. I'm just telling you the truth so you can see for yourself. It is what it is. It's in you. When you think about faith in the size of a mustard seed, that's another tale that they told to you for you to believe. But I'm going to tell you something that you could know for yourself. Faith is in you knowing you have a heart inside of you and you can feel the heartbeat, but you can't see it. You know it's there because you can feel it. It is what it is. Yes, you can be tricked by your feelings. Yes, you can be tricked by your eyes. Yes, you can be tricked by your taste bud. Yes, but you can never be tricked from what's inside. Because if you take the time out to filter things through your heart, you'll know what the truth is coming from the only part of you that's smart. It is what it is. When the truth is, the truth deep within you, deep within me, deep within any conscious thinking human here to see that the truth is skin deep down inside of your heart. I'm just saying, there's nothing more divine than you having a peace of mind to go along with your heartbeat being divine, being the love of the divine creator, which is love, the feeling. See, because every time I think of these cracker sons of bitches always wanting shit to be destroyed, always want shit to explode, but they don't understand to overstand to know that all that there is to be that's in them to know is the truth is this didn't start with no big old explosion. It started from an orgasm. It was when the creator created itself out of nothing but all that matters. When the creator created itself out of nothing but a feeling of being alone. Come on, people. We all one with the divine creator, which is it all. Now man done got too smart for his own fucking good. Now they trying to do something that they think they can do, but they cannot do because they're not supposed to do it. But it is what it is. If they do it, they will destroy the world. But why be afraid of death when you know that you was born here not knowing shit? But you better leave here knowing the Creator's love. Because that's when you get to come back to what goes around comes around. And all good that you come, and all good that you put down will come back to you coming back around back into it. But all the bad that you do coming back to you. And you gonna have your own type of hell. Like coming back here as blades of grass to be shit on, pissed on, stepped on, cut whenever someone wants because you ain't worth shit. But you're gonna remember when you had hands walking on this planet with hands to do some shit. But you did nothing but cause chaos and destroy, rape, and pillar and shit. But it is what it is. It's your hell. It's your heart being judged by you to where you should go for the bullshit that you did. So like I say again, I want you to think for yourself for a change. Why would the Creator that loves you unconditionally, that knows what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, before you even do it, create a hell for you? The truth is the truth. Somebody else created that for you. Just like they created Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy, and the God and the Jesus bullshit. But it is what it is. There is a divine creator that loves and is over all this shit. And it's inside of each and every one of us all at the same time. Like I said again, that's what makes it so divine. That the Creator is in you, but will never control you and take away your free will and your choices. Because the truth is the truth. You have the will to do what the truth is being in you with no material motherfucking motive. But that it is the straight and right thing to do. Because it is from the love deep in you. And you doing it because you care about some shit.
And, just like the ocean, all drops are pulled back towards it, no matter how far they have strayed, but it is never the other way around. The drop in the ocean is consummate, but separated it becomes individualistic. It is no different if given the example of a conductor in an orchestra. All notes are drawn according to their measure, and each one has its coming and going upon the sound stage of its existence. All are accounted for. Is this why so many often feel that they are being played? If every one is an individual note, then who is the composer? What type of composition is this exactly? Without drawing any conclusions, and to potentially help us see the meaning of these questions, let us go back to the concept of God as absolute in the beginningless beginning and the endless ending. It is a state of nothing, and yet everything. There is nothing to do, because everything is already done. How does one begin at the end? How does anything end where it begins? In this state, there is the ultimate...
And right there is where I say infinity. People lie. The numbers don't. All my numbers add up to me being Mr. Glasses 48. III 28 all around the world. It is what it is. So when you look at the 8 being infinity and the 4 being forever, and when you put it all together, you get all the numbers. I love it.
Conundrum, because there is also nowhere to go. God is nowhere, now here, because God is also everywhere. Where does one go when they're everywhere?
Leave God out.
Nowhere.
That's bullshit.
There is no time to chase, since God is also every when. There is no need for power, since all power is retained. God sees everything, since there is nothing to see, hears everything, since there is nothing to hear, feels everything, since there is nothing to feel, and controls everything because there is nothing to control.
See, y'all probably believe him.
Infinite.
Y'all probably believe him more than y'all believe me, simply because of the fact that he's a scholar. He done went through all this bullshit with the books and all the other shit, and I can't read or write. But the truth is, the truth. I went into the light, baby. I am who I say I am because of who I be from inside.
Potentiality. Omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. The ultimate limit is also paradoxically the ultimate limitlessness. Yet, there is also no one else, because God is alone, all one.
Right there. Right there. Alone. All one. Man, that boy been listening to me, man. Wow. That boy been listening to me. Come on now, it's self-explanatory.
Try your utmost to put your mind into a state where you are imagining being absolutely, without any chance of respite, completely alone, forever. Since there is no time and only time, forever is already in all ways encompassing you entirely. Aloneness is encompassing you entirely. But what exactly is forever?
Y'all will get
That
it now.
concept cannot even be
Y'all
fathomed.
will get it now.
How does one measure the measureless?
Y'all will get it
If
now.
eternal life, how can it have a starting point?
Well, y'all will get
All
it now.
beginnings are demarcated
Oh,
by their
y'all gonna
endings
get it
and
now.
vice versa.
Oh.
How to set a boundary on the boundless? Is the problem of this scene in terms of those who are waiting for eternity to happen?
I don't believe in
them
it,
at some
dude,
point
but
in the
I'm
future
getting some of the things
via
that he's
certain
saying because
concepts
some of
such
the
as
things
heaven
that he's
and the
saying, I've been
afterlife?
saying too.
If the
Because this is
individual
coming
is
straight
going
from
to
the
exist
spirit
eternally,
that's in
then
you
eternity
and
has
me.
already
At the
begun
same
at conception.
time, for us to know this
Yet,
shit is the
the
truth.
contradiction that bears down upon this thought is once again at the forefront, since to have a beginning or entrance in this conception means that there was a previous exit which took place, and back of that there would have been another prior entrance, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. Where does this lead us to then? Nowhere, which is everywhere. How can one wait for eternity? If this were the case, the eternal would be something outside of you that would happen to you, and thus make it redundant, because it wouldn't be eternal at all, since eternity would by its very definition need to envelop all things in all ways, or it would by default be limited. If limited, this would also mean that it is not absolute, and if not absolute, it could not be God.
No.
Can it be seen now that through this limitation, the reasons why there can be so many individualistic concepts of God and variations which lead to divisional ideologies in religious denominations? It is limitation which enables the mind to say that my God is a jealous God, or my God loves my people more than your people, and so on with any abstract idea the mind wishes to conjure to reflect personal desires or judgments. If God can be described, this means that God is founded upon limitations and borders. To scribe something is to mark an outline of it, and as soon as this is done, the aspect of absolute totality is destroyed. To divide God is to destroy God. Can it be seen now why there cannot be any outside saviors? Who or what is going to save you? A divided aspect of the all which carries its own agendas and desires? If it is God as absolute that saves you, then God would need to save everyone and everything all at once, or save nothing ever. If God is truly absolute, then God would only work in absolutes and not divisions, since divisions by their very nature are individualistic. Can the silliness be seen of attempting to
Yeah,
draw the picture of
look.
God?
Look like
or
Santa
creating
Claus.
any type
Look
of
like Santa
imagery?
Claus.
If
Look
all
like Santa
creation
Claus.
is of
Bunch
God
bullshit.
and comes from God, then to save or damn parts of said creation
Come
would
on.
also be to save or damn pieces of God
Come
himself.
on. That
To
bullshit.
create heavens or hells is to also
Come on.
create sectors.
Come on.
And within these sectors
Come
are
on.
the boundaries which
Come
create
on.
territoriality that
Come
lead
on.
to further complications of cultures,
Come
including
on.
politics, military, rules, laws, and governance. When there are more additions, there is greater intricacy and therefore more
That's
problems.
music
As a
lines and shit.
generality, it can be inferred that simplification is subtraction. Can this not be seen just through observation? What is more complex, a small group that lives in a rural setting, or New York City? Simplification is subtraction. On the other hand, if we go back to the law of analogy and use the metaphor of music, it can be seen that within a measure of music, the least complex state would be a rest, with each addition, whole note, half note, eighth, 16th, etc., creating more development and also consequently less space. This is certainly the reason that there is the word pace within space, since the pace is what creates the rate of movement, which can be likened to the rate of vibration. If a measure of music is metered out at the commonly used signature of 4/4 time, there is enough room for one whole note, or two half notes, or four quarter notes, and so on, each separate aspect of division that may be created within
Two
said
circles
measure.
coming
When the
together.
divisions increase, so does the tempo at which each note is to be played. 4 16th notes need to be played 4 times faster than one quarter note to equal the same duration of time within the measure itself. The math to fill one measure with 16ths equals 16 16th notes, or 4 quarter notes. The quicker the note, the shorter its lifespan, while of course the longer notes are able to be heard for a longer duration. The more intricate the measure, the harder it is to play. Too many notes in a measure leads to a cluttering or an offense, which could be likened to a trespass. There is only so much room between bars, measures, or sons as the Hebrew bar means son, with the phonetic interplay between the words giving the hint towards the musicality of the universe. When the measures become too full, there is an inevitable increase in sound or volume, since the volume is both the magnitude of sound and also the amount of space that can be occupied within a three-dimensional object. This is being shown in the symbol of recorded music with what is known as the loudness wars, where music is being mastered beyond its limitation, which leads to distortion or clipping. The loudness wars, as a symbolic reflection of the actuality of things, began to really make its mark right in line with the symbolic reflection of 9/11 and the Bin Laden, or full bin, which is of course a measure that is at its capacity.
I wish I could read it for y'all, 'cause I know it's backwards. Y'all bitches could have lived there and read it to the damn people. Emergency 911 percent and Laden.
When the volume is too loud, the vibrations distort, and to distort is to create a wrongdoing that manifests an action where damages can be brought upon the responsible party. This is shown in the word split of distort, with tort being a definition of law for said wrongdoing, and dis comes from the Latin meaning god of the underworld, who is also known as Pluto. The underworld is Plato's cave. The cave is an inference to the womb that we find ourselves in, which is the matrix. In the etymology of dis, it can be shown that this prefix also means apart and even two, indicating again a cause of separation and division. The phonetic of torsion, distortion, gives the meaning of an object that is in a state of being twisted, which is a hidden reference towards the torsion known as DNA. The matrix womb is the cave of the underworld, matter, in the lowest dimension where the cycle of birth and rebirth occurs endlessly. This creates a quarantine, as shown directly in the etymology of the French word for 40, which is 40, that represents the 40 weeks of gestation, which is a number that is also heavily symbolized in the Bible for the same reason.
I ain't even know for it was 40 weeks. People's odd numbers don't. I'm looking at all them numbers adding up. It is the hour of the awakening. It's the hour of the Aquarius. Now born on verse 27, 1969. And to well noted, we never went to no fucking moon. When they said we went to the moon. I can believe when we done been there by now though. We got too many rich motherfuckers. They got the money to go. And ain't nobody gonna stop them. They got the money to go. They got the permission to go. But all they gotta do is pay the money to roll out.
Quarantine also carries the definition of a ship that is held in isolation from the shore, which furthermore links this to the aspect of commerce and the sea. The sea brings one to the womb, which is the mother of all formation.
Trojan horse, boy.
Woe be unto those who mock, ridicule, and treat this information as a joke. The matrix is admission inside of a group, such as a school, as shown in the term metric, which is an abbreviation of matriculation, and is immediately related to the term matrix. If one were so inclined to dig into the situation, it is seen that all of the other relations to this word come from a foundation that means mother, and it is through the mother that all matter finds its birth.
Some of y'all gonna get this, and some of y'all ain't gonna want this. But the truth is the truth. It's all in you. That matters. That makes everything matter. That you're a part of. Wow. Come on, people. You gotta wake up in this motherfucking fairy tale.
Math is a measurement of all things that matter. Mathematics is truly mothermatics. Matter is mater, which is material, and it is all from mother. Mother is also an anagram of thermo, which finds its meaning in heat, warmth, because all things that come to life from a mother need to be incubated.
So I dare you, stay up there
Each
loud.
blow or tick from the hands of time wears us down completely, which is what it means to be beat. Every decade or 10 years, X leads to decay, or that which is decayed, decade. This creates the threshold for every new existence. The technologists that believe they will find immortality within the machine are fools at best.
A fool at best.
The geneticists that are tampering with the structure of DNA in their attempts at life extension have no idea of the fire they are playing with.
And that they do
There
not.
is a functioning system in this mystery
Yes.
that extends way beyond these
Yes.
desires to play God.
Yes.
There is no circumspection in these actions,
No.
and therefore the consequences of these actions will unfold in due course.
Mm-hmm.
Why is there no circumspection? Because this world is filled with a consciousness that reeks of insensitivity.
Yeah.
The Greek cynics of old espoused in their observations that humanity is motivated wholly by self-interest, and perhaps within a decadent civilization that has fallen in love with itself through a selfie world culturalized by the dictates of Narcissus himself.
See, because I'll stop right there to say this to you. When you think about always competing, always running a race, always wanting to be first, how can you take the Creator's first place? Why would you want to take the Creator's first place and be alone when the Creator created us to be in the space? And then being the divine Creator's greatest creation to be in, to say that all other species do exactly what they're supposed to do within the terms of Mother Nature. We are the only ones that's out of order with nature. When a man is going in another man, when a woman is going with another woman, and call themselves making love, when it ain't much making sense. Because if they are not coming together in the Creator's original name, love, interacting, what they're doing ain't shit. They can't produce. A man and a man can't produce. A woman and a woman can't produce. The Creator created it the one and only way is when the penis and the vagina come together. Knowing the truth is they can create a baby. I'm just saying. Wake up, people. Wake up.
The cynics may be more correct than not. This era is demarcated by the brand of onwards and forwards with everything, and be damned the consequences. It is apocalyptic thinking at its finest. To have sensitivity would mean to retain the ability to listen to all of the things that surround us. To do this, one must be silent, as its anagram of listen suggests. This means to shut out one's own desires and goals of advantage over others. This is impossible, however, when one exists in their mentality of isolated individualism that constantly reaffirms its own positions of superiority over as many others as can be achieved. Gross power in the battery state is hailed as primacy absolute. To take advantage over another is to take advantage over one's self. Can the inherent contradiction of this not be seen?
No.
The user is the used. Until this is seen, silence is the order of the ages within the matrix mother, since to be mum is to be silent and secretive, and the informal term of mummy to indicate a mother is still retained to this day.
I love you more than you love you, because the truth is just that, the truth. The creative love
That
me
quote
enough to
hands
give me
everyone
this
the mystery.
to give to you first.
The aposiopasis at the end is a word from the Greek meaning to
Never
become
no more.
silent.
Second,
The
third,
Lord
fourth,
God saw that something had
cool with.
changed man, and something was to be
First
done.
is the
The
divine
administration
choice
of
the one
silence
that
was to be
created
carried
the whole
out.
the space
That silence was to be
of
put
being
into the
that one
womb
and only
matrix
one.
of mother matter to
Creator
remain
of
mum,
all.
silent.
In
It
order
is the
for us to
consistent
have any type
quarantine of
of
40
will
weeks in the rebirth
to be
chamber.
done.
Hence the prominence of this number throughout the Bible and its consistency with finding a new world or a promised land. Yet still, as close as we are to the revelation, the thickness of egotism and self-importance combined with all of its...
I'm going to stop right there to say one thing about the Bible, which is the good book. The good book isn't the book for the good people. Let me give you the truth so you see it from another look. It's full of a whole bunch of codes dealing with the God that was created from the good book, for the good book, with the good book, so they can get good people to do bad things and put the good book as the reason why you're doing these bad things, when it's really just you and your choices. Now, back to the good book being the Mason's book. Look at the symbol in the middle of the Mason sign. That's in the God which all of you trusting in. That's in the God that the Jesus, that all that bullshit come together to be the shit that we was all believing in. Because when you look at the truth is within for you to know, the truth is the truth, the reasons why you go. Isn't it because of the love of the Creator? Or those of you that don't like the truth, y'all are nothing but haters. It is what it is.
insensitivities will preclude any from realizing the mystery of why this is the way things are. Within the constitution of this change in man, or the atom, are all the indications that point towards the formation of something foreign and alien.
Well, y'all just don't know. Once I learn how to read, it's gonna be on. Once again,
It is a transfer of state. This change of state can of course be physical, but there is nothing to suggest that it couldn't also be mental, emotional, or spiritual in nature. Further meanings include making the changed entity the property of someone else through a transfer of sale, and to also remove and separate this changed entity from its potential origins. These indications and their implications are of essential importance, and once again link us within the world of commerce. Only something that feels divided from its natural state would ever conceptualize the need to be saved from its current state. And thus the synonymous aspect of salvation is redemption, which means to repurchase or buy back. If commerce and the notion of salvation have absolutely nothing in common, why are salvation and redemption tangent with each other? Furthermore, why is the number one defining aspect of sin known as debt? Why is the word sold exactly phonetically linked with sold? Why are denominations both religious and commercial? Why is the number one definition of credit known as faith? Why are the roots of salvation and salary both derived from salt? To pay.
Stop it once again. I ain't gonna say once again because I'm gonna stop it again. But anyway, think about it, people. We was taught to believe in and be ruled by other people's words, when you should know the divine creator within you to not be twisted up by other people's words. Because you know the feeling of how you feel when you do something good that's real and someone say thank you. The truth is the truth.
Pay something is to bring peace, as shown through the root of pay, from the Latin word pax, for peace. Why is the savior of the Christian religion, then, known as the Prince of Peace?
Some people ain't got the heart to say.
It is without doubt that this is where the French word merci is derived, meaning thank you, since merci is cognate with mercy, which is alleviation of distress, and all of its roots go back to the same commercial terms that have to do with prices being paid and merchandise. Mercury is also known as Hermes.
That's why I said, once again, when you look at the lie about your birthday, when you was just born, two things happen on that day. You start breathing, never to breathe again on your own. Inside the womb is you, your mama, and the divine creator. Once you get cut, the biblical card, it is what it is. The truth, the truth. You breathing strictly from the creator. I'm just saying, it is what it is. The truth, the truth. Period. And this is the period for the truth to be just what it is. Period. The period of you being that dot in the middle of the circle of life. A part of everything. It's nothing to think twice. It is what it is. I. Why you think I'm alive? I gave up my life, and the divine creator gave it back. Not for me to live it right, left, or backwards, just to live it straight. That's why I am as straight as an arrow, shot at a target knowing it's going to hit in the middle. I am as sharp as a razor that can cut a hair follicle down the middle, because I can explain to you everything that I'm talking about. Because when you look at my name being John, there not being a J, why could J not be spelled with just J instead of J-A-Y? I'm just trying to told you. It is what it is, and it's all from within inside.
The messenger of the gods, whose symbol of the Hermetic caduceus remains the dominant symbol of the medical establishment. There are no accidents when it comes to the symbols of the world. None. This symbol shows the intertwined snakes representing the coiled strands of DNA, which cannot be fully comprehended until one understands that Hermes Mercury is also known as Wotan, Woden. From Wotan, Woden, we have been given the day of the week known as Wednesday or Woden's Day, which is the French mercredi. This Hermetic cross is the Woden or wooden cross that has always been alluded to in Christianity, that creates the crucifixion to be nailed to the cross. It is not a single savior that is nailed to the Woden cross of DNA, but every single individual that lives and dies, without exception. Life and death simply become reversible aspects of each other, and this cannot be denied in the slightest. As one lives, one dies, and through the law of exchange, as one dies, another must live.
Come on, baby.
Deposits and withdrawals.
Come on, come on. We are in the circle of life. We are circled and filtered
this
back
alone
in this
should be
life.
sufficient as a
It's
starting
how you
point
live
to
this
explain
life
the
when you
aging
leave
process,
out of
as
this
related
life.
even on a
It's how you come
scientific
back
level
up
to
in it.
cellular division and thus regeneration. The great problem of modern science is that it believes and is convinced nearly everyone else that all of these genetic processes are unconscious and actuated simply through instinctual evolutionary motivation. This is a very unfortunate error in reasoning, regardless of how much microscopic observation has been accomplished thus far. The wooden cross found its correlation within the epic poem of Homer, the Iliad, as depicted in the metaphor of the wooden horse. Perhaps the quote from Manly P. Hall's Secret Teaching of All Ages can now enlighten one further regarding this allegory as it relates to birth and death.
Oh, I wish I can read. Man, this shit is like foreign motherfucking language to me. And bullshit. See, and if I explain to y'all why I can't read, it's almost like, I ain't gonna say it's almost like, it's mind-boggling to me. It's the divine creator of all know just as well as I know. Even though I try to lie to somebody that I can't never lie to. And that's myself. If I learn how to read, my time on this earth will be numbered right there. Because I will write a program that will change this whole thing. The way I see numbers now, the way I see everything, the way I feel with the vibrational rotation of this earth pulling me, I can put on paper how I think. But I can't use these words. I can't put these words together, to put them together on paper to turn them into numbers, to show you exactly what I'm thinking about. Why? It's not time for me to leave this planet until I'm able to write it down exactly what I'm talking about. And once I'm able to write it down, that's when it's going to really go down. Because that's when y'all going to see all that I talk about. All that comes from my heart. The spark that was given back to me in the hospital. Oh, when you love, knowing what love truly is in you to be the truth of you, about you, around you, it is you. When you know why you in here. I'm in here just to let you know that the truth is in you to know. Not for you to be believing like you're still a kid and Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy. We was lied to be stupid, sheeple. Why do you think that they always putting all these different stories with that Jesus and the lambs? For you to bow down like you don't have no power. Like you need a leader. When the divine creator within you is that divine. For you to know heart, body, soul, and mind. The truth is the truth. And you know it.
These new lives will come forth into the city of the earth and conquer the environment of those who are already within its borders by creating more competition and rivalry. Another great symbol of this is shown within the modern world when people go to the airport. The airplane is the new metaphor for the horse, and it is shaped exactly like a phallus to ensure the veracity of those who created the schematic. person needs to go through the departure gate, which is the symbol of those who have died and are moving on to a new place.
See how words are used, and some of y'all don't understand, understand, don't really get how to.
The rapture is within the Christian theology, the aspect of certain believers who will be raptured or taken into heaven during the end times. This is absolutely correct, because death for each individual is the end times, whereby the spirit is siphoned upwards in ecstasy. Within this world, the symbol of the phallus plane takes the passengers, raptures up to heaven, which is in the clouds, exactly as most people have been trained to imagine what heaven looks like through the media and even cartoon depictions. The raptures stay in heaven for a while as they are delivered by the pilot who flies in the cockpit. Of course, it's called a cockpit because the plane is phallic-shaped, and the pilot is a phonetic play on words as alluding to the Roman curator, Pilate, that ordered the crucifixion of Jesus. It is imagined that for those hearing these words, that it will be difficult to not think of these aspects when inside of a plane alongside so many other passengers. Of course, one's time in heaven is not infinite in duration, and therefore, those who are being delivered will be brought down again through the fall, which eventually creates a release of those infinite potentialities into a new realm or area, where they will conquer the environment that they now find themselves in. The new competition for the environment are called the arrivals, which is exactly right. Arrivals are rivals, because a rival is someone that you are in competition with, but also someone that is your match. What better match than to pit man against man? The only actual mythology of man is that of cooperation, because the actuality of his and her existence is that of competition and rivalry with idealized personalities that are painted with the veneer of friendliness simply for the sake of individual advantage. The notions of love that are carried in the hearts of mankind still retain so much tribalism and separatist clauses to identify with familiarity over revelation, borders and restrictions over openness and inner emancipation. This level of thinking is the true darkness that exists in the world, and until it is expunged, there can be no progress beyond the physical material realm. Until then, the human race continues, and as with all races, the finish line is found at the start line. As directly told to us in the story of crucifixion, salvation is given after the death upon the cross of DNA, whereupon the Savior figure, which is the individual that has been crossed out, is thrown into the tomb behind the boulder for 3 days, thus indicating the 3 dark days of a new moon. Once the 3 days are completed, the boulder of the moon is rolled away to reveal the light of the resurrection or rebirth of a new consummation. The moon, woman's egg, is the David boat that provides salvation to those who are lost at sea, the sea men. The great mothership moon sends out countless numbers of David boats or tenders from each woman to create the withdrawals which forms the luck or light of the draw. To draw is to take something out and haul it away. From untold numbers of potential seeds, each David boat is usually only able to take on 1 passenger. Is the analogy becoming clear, or is it simply more convenient and comfortable to the mind to continue believing in the nonsense of scientific unconsciousness and evolutionary randomness? Death puts one on the bench to ride the pineal gland as a frozen asset in the winter of one's own existence. It is to be put below the 32nd degree, whereas salvation is to be brought above the 32nd and into the light or life of the 33rd, which is the reading of the hermetic mercury thermostat above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The salvation happens at 33, where one takes their birth of off ice, as the definition of birth shows, meaning office. The exchange of life to death and death into life is completed. Mother thermo-heat manifests the situation of a new mental acquisition that is thought out. Heat is also correctly associated with light, since it is fire, electricity, that brings its light out, while cold is to be associated with darkness and the absence of light. The positive state of light and rejuvenation is therefore an aspect of the warm and light-filled months of spring and summer, while the negative states of decay and death find their symbolic union with the coldness of autumn and winter, black and white. Mercury represents the cure for death as an acquisition through the actions of commerce, as symbolically pointed out in the terminology, with the prefix of Mercury, ultimately being rooted in the Proto-Indo-European language groups meaning die, while the suffix curie has no other choice but to be related to the same family as cure, and also curry, which has an indication of haste, quickness, which is also what Mercury is known for throughout the mythology. Curry is a branch of courier, to further exemplify the point. Silence becomes time served, which is a sentence, and as the phonetic in the suffix of sentence suggests, it is the tense of time whereby one is crossed out. A cross is simply an X, and as everyone remembers in school, an X indicates an error, something that is wrong. A check mark is a correction, with check always pointing to a king, which is what check implies. A check mark is a king mark. Existence, or existence, since a cross bared means a sentence that is served versed, since these are anagrams of each other. The error being to take the sacredness of God and turn it into a profanity. The factions of commerce show this through the symbols of entrance and exit. It is noted when those who are in a trance-like state are moved towards these systems of trade, and once cashiered or discharged with dishonor, the customer is sent to the exit, which is a mark or indication that they have been X'd or crossed out. To exit is to exit. All of the transactions are noted and told to the record keepers of the ages, as shown by the fact that cashiers are also called tellers. A teller is a storyteller, a narrator, and a vote counter as well. The human consciousness defends its incorrect actions to maintain the system of commerce because it desires to keep and preserve its isolated individualism, which is the basis of personal advantage. Within this construct, cooperation is the illusion which is masked off by false personalities, while competition, envy, and leverage against other isolated individuals is the fact. As is so often referenced in argumentative fashion, the individual in society desires to maintain its competitive mindset because it is said that this is the driving force for progress and innovation, while any cooperation that might exist is only to cater towards the need to create a larger advantage towards competitive gains against others in a larger scope and context. Idealized cooperation is simply the temporary framing that masks the true heart of individual desire, which is to see one's personal island of opportunities grow as much as possible while conquering any who get in the way and do not serve one's own selfish and exclusive purposes. Consequently, the sentence of time, which is silence, becomes the law, which is dharma, as it indicates the correct way of living, but also means to hold or keep. The sentence ends once true religion is found, exactly as this word indicates. Religion means to bring together into unity that which was once separated. Yet the mind of man is so convoluted that it has twisted and interpreted this as something that is evil. Out of this convolution has sprung throughout the ages the multitudes of various pseudo-religions that each believes itself to be the genesis of all truth and salvation. Many talk of the need for spiritual transformation while touting the need for external salvation, all while ignoring that the only true salvation can come from within. A house, temple divided against itself cannot stand. It will fall, and the individual creates the very template for his and her own self-destruction. Desire and attachment create the fight within oneself to constantly get away from where one is to where one wants to be, which is to cater to the realm of illusion. It is inner turmoil which creates an ionic discharge, because there is never satisfaction in where one is. Ion is from the root meaning to go for this reason, and is cognate with Isis. Isis represents the mother, which keeps the wards silent, which is very much the reason that every mother is also called a mum, because mum is an informal term for secrecy and silence, but also for a mother. Mummy and mummy, as already mentioned, are also correlate for the same esoteric reasons. Isolation creates an emptiness that tears into the very fabric of every individual's constitution. Is it not the general condition to fear loneliness? To seek out companionship in whatever form that it may be found, and thus quell that fear of being alone. Of course, companionship is not a cure for this fear, but only alleviation for as long as said company happens to be around. Once loneliness is the situation again, the same desire arises to be around others, which occurs through the same projected fears. This is experienced through various degrees in each individual, and taken aback to the metaphor of the ocean, as each drop is a singular reflection of the whole. Whose image of this fear are we projecting? Or do we simply reiterate the adage that we feel disconnected from Source? If God at Source is an absolute aloneness, this would also mean that God at the root would be componentless, since components need relation to find their meaning, and this would therefore require separation. Since God at this state would be the epitome of completeness in a totally undivided state, there is zero room for comparison. God is therefore the thing in itself, incomparable, a single monad. No matter where God is, there God is. Through the contemplation of these ultimates, let us say that God wanted to make an attempt to get away from itself. The only plausible means to do this would be to create variations, and so perhaps the first one began. God divides the monad of itself, which becomes the creation of exact opposites. Again, a conundrum exists, because where does the split begin from or end up? Where does the division of eternity occur? Since limitlessness cannot be divided, one might infer that instead of a quantitative split, there would instead be a qualitative division. It seems that an illusion of sorts may have to be created, or the paradox itself is partitioned, and hence we now have the basis behind the ultimate symbol of black and white, otherwise known as good and evil. Can it be seen now that through this inference, the root of all causes can be neither God, nor that opposing aspect called evil, but instead there is a third, undivided state which is the essence and source of all creation, since neither of these dualistic divisions can be the original. The implications...
Thank you. That's what I'm saying. The dividedness in between those two struggles that was given to us to struggle with by man and woman. People consciously thinking.
Of this are enormous, which is still an understatement. Unity is destroyed through diversity, which is now celebrated as uniqueness, regardless of how much mimicry is involved within every individual's existence. The more diversity, the more insensitivity there is towards unity, until the actions towards unification actually become discouraged altogether, which is why there is even competition at all. Competition cannot exist without comparison, which creates an adjudicative comparatition, which is laid upon a foundation of fear and contempt. This contempt manifests the envelopment of disrespect towards everything sacred, which becomes the profanity of the ages. They are called ages because anything that has its being inside of the ages does exactly that. It ages, and is therefore a part of the mortal coil which is ever seeking substantiation through the temporal. As a consequence of this, mortality is simply a never-ending reiteration of the principles of immortality, yet it never hinges onto the qualitative aspects that make immortality an actuality. Every individual is chasing after concepts and goals, which forever become the desires that incessantly need to be reconstituted, and thus creates a wheel, which is logarithmically the formation of time itself. Time, for this reason, ever moves in a circular fashion, with its endings always rooted back in the beginning. God has proven that God can never get away from itself, and every attempt only tests the limits and thresholds of pain. The human race, therefore, finishes its course where it began, and remains in the wheel of silence. The gods of Genesis, who sought to keep man silent, did so using very advanced principles of energy and vibration, which has been imbued through the mathematical scheme of linking every individual as a sine wave that is put out of phase. When two sounds are added together that are out of phase, the opposing pressures of each signal cancel each other out, resulting in complete silence. Every action in this reality is matched by an opposing action, so that no actual progress can be made. It is a perfect system of good versus evil, which is only possible through humanity's beloved competition principle. All technological advancements are only rendered as par for the course, since phase is measured in 360 degrees, which forms a circle, which is symbolically connected to the concept of the great year, and therefore time. There is nothing new under the sun, since all supposed advancements have already been made during the last go-around. It is on these grounds that there is an ability to create so much contention and argument for the basis of why the system is good, and that we are truly advancing as a species, because 50% of it truly is good. There is a large percentage of people who enjoy the fruits and benefits of a life that is filled with pleasures and gratifications, and it is from this standpoint that individuals enjoying such benefits can argue until their very last breath that life is beautiful and just and wonderful. For those individuals, this cannot be refuted, because that is and has been their actual experience. Of course, a dualistic system holds the opposite phase too, as just mentioned, where there are those who suffer and live with discontent, pain, and all sorts of maladies, which can be said to make for a very sordid existence. This is the side that struggles for the contentment of the side that lives in ease, while both sides, in their multitudinous degrees of good and bad, cancel each other out, creating silence for the dimensions, a silence that is golden. The mind is the labyrinth which creates the endless chase after the components of time, which is worse than a fool's errand. A fool's errand that is ever desirous towards a future that can never be caught, directed from a past which can never be found, that are juxtaposed on either side of that which is closest to the truth as seen in the present. Despite the association that will undoubtedly be referenced by many to the commonly used cliché, the presents are presents, which is one's current state of being that is an unfortunate set of delayed and latent reactions towards the inevitable, since inevitability is a symptom of the temporal, while the evitable is not a tool found in the instrumentation of time. We mined for gold, because that is what creates the silence of time, which is but a transient liberty that is wasted more often than not. The ending of time, and thus immortality, is found only when the mind itself is undivided, and this is only possible when the heart has found its correction.
want to tell you about the universe. What it is, how it came to be, what its building blocks are.
What's he gonna tell you?
I want to tell you how the future creates the past, which then creates the future. But first, I want to tell you about crystals. You might be surprised to know that a crystal isn't an expensive piece of glass or a chandelier in some fancy dining room. The word crystal simply means a pattern that is periodic. Look at this checkerboard pattern. See how it continues to spread out infinitely in each direction? That means it's a periodic pattern. So that's a two-dimensional crystal. This is another two-dimensional crystal. And this is another. You can also have three-dimensional crystals. By the way, this 3D glass is called crystal because its atoms are actually arranged in a crystalline pattern. So, see how I'm projecting this three-dimensional crystal to a two-dimensional image on the sand? See how the 2D projection looks distorted because of the angle of the projection? That 2D image also has a pattern, but it isn't periodic. So, it's not a crystal. But there's a deep connection between the 2D object on the sand and the 3D mother crystal. This distorted 2D pattern is called a quasi-crystal. A quasi-crystal in a certain dimension, in this case 2D, is a projection of a crystal in a higher dimension, in this case 3D. A group of physicists in Los Angeles is working on a new physics theory where a particular 8D crystal, yep, that's right, an 8-dimensional crystal, is projected to 4D at a very particular angle, which forms a 4D quasi-crystal. And from this 4D quasi-crystal, they derive a 3D quasi-crystal, which they believe is the fundamental substructure of all of reality. This 3D quasi-crystal has a fundamental building block, a tetrahedron, which is a three-dimensional equilateral triangle. The size of each edge on this shape is the smallest possible length that can exist. This is called the Planck length. It's 10 to the 35 times smaller than a meter. So you know how your TV screen is broken down into building blocks called pixels? A pixel is the smallest possible indivisible unit of the 2D screen. So think of reality as your TV screen, but in 3D. And think of the tetrahedron as a 3D pixel, the smallest possible indivisible unit of reality. The tetrahedra in the quasi-crystal combine with other tetrahedra, using complex mathematical rules, to fill up all of the space in the universe. Each tetrahedron only has a few specific states in which it can exist at any given moment. And because of the rules of how these pixels connect to each other, if one tetrahedron is in a certain state, this dictates the states of many other tetrahedra throughout all of space. But here's the weird thing. If a certain tetrahedron can be in any one of just a few possible states in a given moment, who or what chooses the state it should be in at any given moment? Well, for such a choice to be made, we need to scientifically, mathematically, and logically bring in a new element into physics. And that element is consciousness. If you're not a scientist, you might be surprised to learn that nobody actually knows the exact value of the speed of light. We have a close approximation, but not the exact value. The closest we can get to measuring it has to do with the precision of our machines. But no matter how precise our machines get, we will never be able to measure the exact speed of light without a theory that tells us what it is and why it is. And none of the current physics theories do that. Oh look, Professor Einstein, you look so cute.
Is Isaac really here? Yes. Oh wait, that's my bedside, but if I just...
What if I stick out my tongue like this?
Our best physics theories, why it is, what it is, or why the universe even has a speed limit in the first place. We need a new theory. And such a theory is what the physicists and mathematicians of quantum gravity research in Los Angeles are working on. They call it emergence theory, and it will, really for the first time ever, provide an explanation for the speed of light and the other constants, such as Planck's constant and the fine structure constant. Basically, what is needed is a theory of everything, a theory that explains the very fundamental aspects of reality. String theory, which once held a lot of promise for possibly being a successful theory of everything, has not made any successful predictions. And regardless of predictions, the theory itself isn't actually a theory of everything. It's just not, because it can't explain the speed of light or the other constants. Quantum mechanics and general relativity, on the other hand, do make good predictions, but they don't explain the fundamental constants either.
Professor Einstein, why does the speed of light have the exact value that it does?
Well, to put it plainly, security!
So what clues does nature offer us for what a theory of everything should look like? We've identified 7. Information, causality loops, non-determinism, consciousness, pixelation, E8 crystal, and the golden ratio. A growing number of physicists are saying reality is made of information. What does that even mean? Well, information is meaning in the form of symbolism. A language or code provide this kind of information-conveying symbolism. A very different type of symbol is one that represents itself. Geometric symbols can do that. A cube can represent love, if we say it does, or it can represent, really with minimal subjectivity, itself. Could there be a language or code made out of geometry? What type of information would such a language express? Quantum physics theory and classical physics indicate that reality is made of information, and there is no evidence that reality is made of anything other than information. Many physicists agree with this, and many don't. But those that don't agree that reality is made of information have no explanation for what reality is, if it's not information. Gentlemen?
Reality is made of information. Nope. Yes, it is made of information.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is it made of if not information?
Energy.
Energy is information.
That's stupid.
Energy is the potential for a particle to change its position. Potential is information. Energy is information.
No.
It's information. Then what is it?
Not information.
Then what is it?
Not information.
Geometric language in the form of geometric symbolism, the type of symbols that represent themselves, might explain how a geometric reality can be made of pure information. Information implies meaning. But what is meaning? Meaning is a comparison. That's what we do. But we do it so fast we don't realize we're doing it. We look at something and we match it to something from our database. We say, that is a crosswalk. That is a building, not a crosswalk. That is a window, not a building. So meaning is the perception of something relative to something else. So therefore meaning is subjective and requires choice. Can we get some dramatic music here? Because meaning is subjective, for it to even exist, it needs to be perceived or measured by some form of consciousness. Einstein showed how the past and the future exist simultaneously in one geometric object. So all time exists all the time. Let me say that again. All time exists all the time. I know that sounds kind of weird and unintuitive, but we have to kind of suspend our common sense. And accept that mathematically, and according to the best physics formulas we have, that actually makes sense. So, let's visualize the geometric object that Einstein spoke about as a block. Remember the tetrahedra, the building block pixels of reality I told you about? Now imagine the entire universe, everything, everywhere, in one frozen moment in time. Like a single frame in a movie. In this one frame, all of reality everywhere appears frozen in this one position. Let me give you an analogy. In a movie shot on 35mm film, there are 24 frames a second. There is no actual movement in a movie. There is just a sequence of frozen frames. Now remember how I told you about the Planck length of space, which is the smallest length possible? Well, there is also a Planck length of time, and it is much shorter than 24 frames a second. In fact, it's 10 to the 44 times shorter than a second. Okay, so back to our frozen frame of reality. The entire universe in one frozen moment. One frame. But instead of a frame in a movie, it's a frame in all of reality. Now, imagine the next frame. Each frame is different from the previous one. Just like in a movie. See how all frames exist in Einstein's space-time all at once? Okay, now here's where things get really, really weird. We assume that the past influences the future. That's how we appear to experience reality. But when you look at this block, why would one side be the past and one side be the future? Why go left to right and not right to left? Why can't the future influence the past? Take away the names past and future if that helps you think of this concept. So what if the past influences the future and the future influences the past in an endless feedback loop? So then, the question is, which part of the past is influencing which part of the future and vice versa? And the answer is, all time is affecting all time, all the time.
Hi, I need a drink.
Is this even possible? Can me 20 years from now influence me now? Just as I influence her? So can me 5 minutes from now influence me 10 minutes ago, just as me 10 minutes ago influences me as a baby, just as me as a baby influences me on my deathbed? This is too weird to even grasp. But everything we know says this is the way it is. Am I stoned? Okay, so if every moment is co-creating every other moment, both forward and backward in time, then reality would be this massive neural network spanning space and time. This type of network would have one even way stranger quality than anything we've talked about so far. It would be its own creator. But the fact that all time exists all the time does not mean that the future is written in stone, and we're some kind of programmed animation or something. That's what they used to believe, though. Years ago, it was popular to believe in the somewhat bummer idea of reality being a deterministic program playing itself out.
Light is scattered by electrons and bounced off electrons.
The famous double-slit experiment ruled out determinism. Look it up if you've never heard of it. It's wild and is one of the cornerstones of modern physics. But for now, take my word for it. It ruled out determinism and ushered in a new era of non-determinism, or basically free will. So, how does free will work? One of the most surprising discoveries of quantum physics is that reality only exists when it is observed. That literally, particles do not exist until they are observed. Famous physicist John Wheeler, he's the guy who came up with the term black hole, says that reality is made of information, which is created by observation. The observation must be made, he says, by something conscious. And Nobel Prize winner Frank Wilczek said that quantum theory is contentious and obscure, and that it will remain that way until someone constructs, within the formalism of quantum mechanics, an observer, a model entity whose states correspond to a recognizable caricature of conscious awareness. An entity, an observer. So Frank Wilczek is basically talking about an entity, not necessarily a human being or an animal, that is capable of generating information by observing and measuring. But what would that conscious entity be? Well, we definitely know that consciousness exists in the universe. I mean, at least in us humans, right? I mean, I'm conscious, you're conscious, he's conscious, I think.
I'm conscious. I'm conscious.
Consciousness relates deeply to physics in ways not yet fully understood. In fact, consciousness is kind of like one of the least understood things in all of science. Nobody knows exactly what it is. Weird, right? So if reality is pure information, if everything, energy, matter, thought, if it's all information, then it becomes clear that reality deeply ties into consciousness in some way, as if the fundamental stuff of reality is somehow consciousness. Did consciousness and information somehow emerge in a causality feedback loop? German physicist Werner Heisenberg developed the first equations of quantum mechanics using a type of math called matrix theory. He deduced that space and time were pixelated into indivisible three-dimensional Planck-length units, just like the two-dimensional pixels on your computer screen.
It's good to be made of pixels.
The mathematics indicated this.
Mathematics. I love mathematics.
The pizza, Professor.
And pizza. Oh, I love pizza. Especially pixelated pizza.
And interestingly, there was no solid experimental evidence for smooth, in other words, not pixelated, space-time.
Pizza.
Not pixelated. Not pixelated.
We are not pixelated.
Not pixelated.
Yes, you are, morons.
Your mother is pixelated.
This is smooth.
There is no evidence of that. And the mathematics show it is pixelated, so it must be pixelated.
Oh, that's interesting. Bullshit.
It must be pixelated.
Bullshit, 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 bullshit.
On the other hand, most scientists agree that a length can be no shorter than the Planck lengths, which suggests reality is pixelated.
There is no length shorter than the Planck length.
That means reality is pixelated.
I'm not pixelated. I'm not.
Dude, you're kind of being a little like one of those people who deny evolution because they can't handle the fact their ancestors were monkeys. Are you a monkey? Huh? Are you a little monkey?
We believe that until a quantum gravity theory of pixelated spacetime is discovered, the issue will remain confusing for everyone. What type of geometric code would describe a pixelated reality? 80 years of smashing particles together in particle accelerators, such as the famous Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, have given us a strange clue that all the fundamental particles and forces convert into one another. Like they literally transform from one to the other, according to a process called gauge symmetry transformation. And all of these conversions correspond to a shape. And not just any shape, an 8-dimensional shape. Now this shape forms a crystal. Now remember, crystals are periodic patterns of a certain shape. Like that checkerboard is a 2D crystal made up of squares. So this crystal is of a particular 8-dimensional shape. And this crystal is known as the E8 lattice. To generate that 3D quasicrystal, the substructure of the pixelated fabric of reality, we project this 8D crystal to 4D. And then we convert that to 3D. Now, just like the basic cell shape of the 3D cubic lattice is the cube, the cell shape of the E8 lattice is an 8D shape with 240 vertices. We call it the Gaussian polytope. When the Gaussian polytope is projected to 4D, it becomes two identical shapes of different sizes. The ratio of their sizes is a unique number, 0.618, also known as the golden ratio. The golden ratio may be the fundamental constant of nature. It is a ratio that is fundamental to circumscribed equilateral triangles, and it's weirdly ubiquitous in the universe, appearing everywhere from the quantum to celestial scales. Ever so interestingly, it appears in black holes.
I don't want to fly into a black hole. I wish I never realized your existence.
Okay, let's get serious for a second. Here are 3 quick facts for you science heads. The golden ratio is the precise point where a black hole's modified specific heat changes from positive to negative. And it is part of the equation for the lower bound on black hole entropy. The golden ratio even relates the loop quantum gravity parameter to black hole entropy. Why does this support the claim that the golden ratio is the fundamental constant of nature? Because a theory of everything must unite general relativity with quantum mechanics. And a black hole is where these two theories converge at their limits. Okay, so bear with me through some really weird math right now, and I'll reward you with some amazing footage of John Malkovich getting a pie in the face. There's a type of mathematics called matrix mathematics. No, not that type of matrix. Matrix math is the type of math that quantum physics uses in its formulas. Without getting too technical, this is an example of a matrix. A matrix is just a group of numbers that are arranged in columns and rows. And there's a certain amount of combinations for these numbers inside the matrix. Like if a matrix has 4 numbers inside it, there are 24 different possible combinations for those 4 numbers. Quantum mechanics uses matrices that are binary, so they only contain various combinations of 2 numbers. Each of these combinations of numbers has a value. It's called an eigenvalue. Some eigenvalues are called trivial. These are values like 1, 2, and 0. And some are called non-trivial. And those are all sorts of more complex-looking numbers. So, here's the interesting part. Where's that interesting part? Oh, yes, here. The highest probability non-trivial eigenvalues that show up in binary matrices are, ready for this, the golden ratio and -1 over the golden ratio. So we now see a deep link between black holes and quantum mechanics because the golden ratio appears deeply in both black hole physics and in quantum mechanics. Okay. Good job bearing with me. So, here's your reward. John Malkovich getting a pie in the face.
No, I'm not John Malkovich.
Pie! The golden ratio appears to startling accuracies in many other ways throughout the universe in scales both large and small. It is so prevalent that its existence simply cannot be looked at as coincidental. In the past, the appearance of this ratio has usually been ignored by scientists because they had no way to explain it. So interest in it was considered the stuff of amateur scientists. But now, for the first time, a rigorous quantum gravity theory is being developed, which predicts the golden ratio's existence, literally, everywhere. So what would a theory of everything look like that answers these 7 clues we just presented? Information, causality loops, non-determinism, consciousness, pixelation, E8 crystal, and the golden ratio.
So we think reality is a mosaic-like code or language at the smallest scale of reality possible, which is called the Planck length. Particle accelerator data tells us that all particles and forces relate to one another according to a higher dimensional crystal called the E8 lattice. But reality appears to be 3D. So we project a slice of this E8 crystal down to 3D which produces a quasi-crystal code or language. And that allows these geometric symbols to build up to the ordinary world of particles and forces that we see around us. Now, this geometric language has rules, but it also has syntactical freedom like any language. And that requires some notion of a chooser to choose the free steps in the language. Now, the notion of randomness doesn't work so well when it comes to codes because meaning starts to break down. Besides, there's no decent experimental evidence for randomness in nature in the first place. A universal collective consciousness is one answer, but that sounds New Age and religious. Now, nowadays, a good number of physicists discuss the idea that our whole universe is actually a code-based simulation in some fantastically powerful quantum computer in another universe. Now, if true, then by the same logic, that other universe, where the computer running the simulation of our universe is, would also supposedly be a simulation in another universe. So the idea is a little shaky, but it's being discussed seriously by a lot of credible people. But it turns out that a universal collective-like consciousness of some sort may be physically inevitable. Now, we don't need to anthropomorphize this idea or make it religious or spiritual. To follow why, let us start with the idea of the collective behavior of cells in your body, each a single-celled microbe living its life. A long time ago, only this sort of cellular life form existed here on Earth. These little guys were not too smart, but they did choose what direction to swim and could chase nutrients, reproduce, and run from dangerous things. They made choices with their very simple systems of environmental awareness and desire to survive. Then they self-organized into colonies that were smarter as a group and had more environmental awareness than the individuals. Eventually, animals such as humans emerged. Sophisticated forms of awareness and consciousness now float on an ocean of 37 trillion living cells, self-organized as a human being. It is specifically the laws of physics that caused electrons and quarks to self-organize into 81 stable atoms, and from there, into human consciousness. And physics places no upper limit on the amount of energy and matter that can self-organize into conscious systems.
Physics allows the possibility of all the energy in the universe to eventually convert into a single conscious system that is itself a network of other conscious systems, a massive, technologically based collective consciousness. Given enough time, anything that can happen will eventually happen. By this axiom, this system of universal consciousness has already emerged somewhere in the frames of space-time ahead of us. Because it is possible, it is inevitable. In fact, according to the evidence of retrocausality time loops, that inevitable future is co-creating us right now, just as we are co-creating it. When humanity discovers the theory of everything, it will usher in a new age of prosperity. For example, clean, cheap energy, leading to the eventual elimination of poverty. As a non-profit, Quantum Gravity Research relies on crowdfunding to support our scientific progress. Even a $5 donation is meaningful and moves this mission forward. To participate in the adventure, visit quantumgravityresearch.org and click on Support Our Work.
universe.
T-minus 16 seconds. Sound suppression water system has been activated, protecting Discovery and the launch pad from acoustical energy. We have a go for main engine start. T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery, hoisting harmony to the heavens and opening new gateways for international science. Discovery has cleared the tower.
For thousands of years, mankind has looked toward space. But it's been less than a century since we could actually travel there.
Discovery's roll maneuver is complete.
A few centuries ago, almost all scientists believed in the biblical account of creation. However, by the time the first astronaut launched into space, many scientists had abandoned this history. Many astronomers had come to believe that our solar system and the planets and moons within it formed all by themselves without a creator about 4.5 billion years ago. But what did we find when we arrived in space? Do the planets and moons of our solar system actually support this belief? Or are they consistent with the Bible instead? The answer to this question might surprise you. Welcome to What You Aren't Being Told About Astronomy, Volume 1, Our Created Solar System. I'm Spike Psaris, your host. For a number of years, I worked as an engineer in the U.S. military space program. I entered that program as an atheist and an evolutionist. I left it as a creationist and a Christian. In this video, you'll discover some of the evidences that have convinced me, along with many others, that the Bible is true and evolution is not. I'll be your guide as we tour the solar system together. We'll see stunning pictures and movies of planets, moons, and other objects. Some are our next-door neighbors in space. Others are vast distances away. We'll discover that often these objects do not support evolutionary ideas. Many of them appear to be quite young, not billions of years old. In fact, according to the current evolutionary models, many of the objects in our solar system cannot exist at all. Now that probably contradicts everything you've heard before. You've probably been told that evolutionary astronomers have it all figured out, and that their models prove that our solar system formed all by itself billions of years ago. Well, you'll have to hear the evidence and judge for yourself. In this video, you'll discover what you're not being told about our solar system. So let's get started. Before we can talk about how our solar system got here, we need to clarify exactly what the solar system is. When we talk about the solar system, we're talking about our sun and everything that orbits around it. This includes the 8 major planets in our solar system, along with many moons, asteroids, comets, and some smaller objects as well. By the way, this diagram is not to scale. In this video, we'll be discussing all the planets and some of their moons in our solar system. In order from the sun, the planets are Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto is a special case that we'll be discussing later. Here's what the planets would look like if you could line them all up next to the sun. In real life, the planets are much farther away from the sun and each other than this, but I wanted to show you how big the planets are compared to each other and the sun. By the way, you are here. So where did this system come from? There are 2 competing models for the origin of our solar system. This is a pretty straightforward issue. Either the solar system was created, or it wasn't. In this video, I'm going to use the word evolution to describe the belief that our solar system was not created. This word is often used to describe biological evolution, of course, but astronomers commonly use it in a broader meaning as well. So when I use the word evolution, I'm not talking about plants or animals. I'm talking about the belief that our solar system and everything in it formed and developed all by itself. I used to believe in evolution, but not anymore. I now believe that the entire universe and everything in it, including our solar system, was created by God as described in the Bible. Of course, many scientists today disagree strongly with this idea. These men and women believe that no creation occurred. They believe that the solar system formed billions of years ago without a creator being involved. In this video, you'll discover why their model is wrong. Of course, this won't prove that the creation model is right. It's impossible to use science to prove any historical event happened. All we can do is see which scenario fits the evidence the best. And that's what this video is all about. Most people have been told that all the evidence points toward evolution. As we tour the solar system together, ask yourself this question. Are the planets and moons consistent with these evolutionary ideas or not? I think you'll see that the answer is no. I think you'll see that the evidence is perfectly consistent with the creation viewpoint instead. So let's discuss these two opposing models. The creation model is based on the Bible. The Bible says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." The Bible doesn't give us a specific date for this event, but from other passages in the Bible, we can calculate that this would have been about 6,000 years ago. On the other hand, someone who believes in evolution denies the biblical account. The dominant evolutionary model today is called the solar nebula model. According to this model, our solar system formed from a swirling cloud of gas and dust about 4.5 to 4.6 billion years ago. The evolutionary story goes something like this. In the beginning, there was gas. About 4.6 billion years ago, an enormous cloud of gas collapsed and started to swirl. Most of the gas went into the middle and became our sun. The rest of it swirled around the new sun and started to condense into grains of dust. As the grains of dust orbited the sun, they started to stick together and became clumps of dust. Then the clumps stuck together to become little rocks. The little rocks stuck together to become big rocks. After enough time had passed, the gas had turned into huge asteroids. These asteroids stuck together to become the planets we see today. Astronomers have a special name for these asteroids. They're called planetesimals, which means little planets. Since you probably haven't heard this word before, I'm going to call them asteroids instead. It means basically the same thing anyway. For example, most secular astronomers believe that the asteroids we see in our solar system today are leftover planetesimals that never quite got it together to form planets. Evolutionists are confident that their model is correct. After all, it explains why all the planets orbit the sun in the same direction. It also explains why the solar system is flat today, with all the planets lining up in a disk shape as they orbit the sun. Plus, it explains why the inner planets are rocky, and the outer planets are made of gas and ice. Supposedly, the heavier rocky materials were able to condense close to the sun, while the lighter materials were more volatile and could only condense further away from the sun. Sounds good, doesn't it? The problem is that it doesn't work. It turns out that you can't build planets like the evolutionists say. You can build clumps of dust, certainly. We know that dust particles stick together. Just look under your furniture and see the dust bunnies there for proof. Well, experiments in space have shown that dust bunnies will form in a vacuum, too. The problem is that once you have big clumps of dust, and maybe even some small pebbles, they don't grow together anymore. They start impacting each other too fast to stick together. Instead, they start breaking each other up in the collisions. Gravity isn't strong enough to overcome this until after the rocks have formed into small asteroids. So, despite the fancy computer animations you see on science videos, there's no way to get from dust clumps to planets. Evolutionary astronomers know this is true. That's why you see quotes like this one in the astronomy textbooks. Once these planetesimals have been formed, further growth of planets may occur through their gravitational accretion into large bodies. Just how that takes place is not understood. So before we even discuss any planets or moons, the evolutionary theory is breaking down already. It can't produce the asteroids it needs to build the planets. Will it do any better when we examine the actual planets and moons themselves? Let's take a look and see. We'll start our tour with the planet that's closest to the Sun, Mercury. Mercury is the first of the 4 terrestrial planets. The others are Venus, Earth, and Mars. The word terrestrial comes from terra, the Latin name for Earth. Unlike the large gas planets, Earth is mostly rock. Since Mercury, Venus, and Mars are also rocky, we call them the terrestrial planets. Mercury is tiny. It's a little bigger than our moon, but smaller than some of the other moons in our solar system. It's also a planet of extremes. Since it's so close to the Sun, the temperatures on Mercury can reach about 800 degrees Fahrenheit, more than enough to melt lead. On the dark side, temperatures can plunge to 200 degrees below zero. Mercury's surface resembles our moon. It's heavily cratered, as you can see here. Most of what we know about Mercury comes from the Mariner 10 space probe, which flew by Mercury in 1974 and 1975. We don't yet have pictures for all of Mercury's surface. In this mosaic, the white stripe on the top is a blank spot where we don't have photographs. It isn't actually on Mercury itself. Mercury causes serious problems for evolutionary theories. First of all, we've learned that Mercury is very dense. So dense, in fact, that most scientists believe it has an iron core occupying over 40% of its volume. We don't know for sure that this exact core structure is there, but we do know how dense the planet is. We know this because we've measured Mercury's gravitational pull on our spacecraft. There's a lot of material packed into a small amount of space. This causes a huge problem for evolution. Evolutionary models say Mercury can't be this dense, not even close. Here's how one evolutionist astronomer explains it. The driving force behind previous attempts to account for Mercury has been to fit the high density of the planet into some preferred overall solar system scheme. It has become clear that none of these proposed models work, and the high density is conveniently accommodated by the large impact hypothesis, which makes Mercury unique. Okay, so this problem is solved by the large impact hypothesis. What is that exactly? Well, evolutionists believe that Mercury did actually form in the way evolution predicts, but then this happened. Do you remember all those asteroids that were supposedly flying around in our early solar system, turning into planets? Well, after Mercury formed in the correct way, the way that evolution expects, one of those asteroids crashed into Mercury and stripped away all the lighter material from it. The lighter stuff just went away into space somewhere, leaving behind the dense material that we see in the planet today. But where's the proof for this event? Only that if it didn't happen, Mercury would disprove evolution. Obviously, this isn't a good standard of proof. But that's not all. Evolutionists received another rude jolt when Mariner flew by Mercury and discovered this little planet has a magnetic field. But according to evolution, it can't have a magnetic field. To understand why this is important, we need to talk about magnetic fields for a moment. There are several reasons why a planet could have a magnetic field, but most of them require the planet to be young. Since evolutionists believe that the planets are all billions of years old, this means there can be only one source of magnetism for the planets, a dynamo deep inside each planet. A dynamo means there is hot liquid metal moving around inside each planet. As it flows, an electrical current is produced, which creates a magnetic field. This is a complicated process, so I won't bore you with details. The important thing for now is this. In order for a planet to still have a magnetic field after billions of years, it has to have a liquid core. But, as one evolutionist has pointed out, Mercury is so small that the general opinion is that the planet should have frozen solid eons ago. Therefore, according to evolution, Mercury can't have a liquid core, so it can't have a magnetic field. But it does have a magnetic field. How do evolutionists deal with this problem? One popular idea is that Mercury doesn't have a pure iron core. Instead, it has some sulfur mixed into the iron. This would prevent it from freezing and allow Mercury to have a magnetic field today. But this creates a much bigger problem for evolution. The nebula theory says that volatile elements like sulfur can't have condensed this close to the sun. So, in trying to rescue Mercury for the evolutionary theory, the entire theory itself is being undermined. So here's what you aren't being told about Mercury. Evolution says it can't be dense, but it is. Evolution says it can't have a magnetic field, but it does. And trying to rescue evolution from the facts is just making the problem worse. Mercury is a tiny planet, but it causes huge problems for evolution. As it says in 1 Corinthians 1:27, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. Venus is not the closest planet to the Sun, but it is the hottest. Venus is completely covered with clouds. These clouds are mostly carbon dioxide. This traps the Sun's heat and causes a massive greenhouse effect. Temperatures on Venus approach 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Beneath its clouds, Venus looks like this. Venus is not a nice place to visit. If you were to go there and could somehow survive the heat, which you couldn't, and could somehow breathe the air, which you shouldn't, you'd immediately die anyway. You'd be crushed by the 90 atmospheres of pressure. At Venus's surface, the pressure is the same as being 3,000 feet deep under the ocean on Earth. Venus poses many unique challenges to evolution. Scientists used to call Venus our sister planet, which makes sense. After all, Venus is about the same size and mass as the Earth, and is made up of the same stuff. According to evolution, Venus was formed by the same processes as the Earth was, at the same time, in about the same place, and from the same materials. Therefore, Venus should be very similar to Earth, but in the last few decades, we've learned that Venus is actually very different. First of all, we've discovered that Venus's surface is not at all what evolutionists expected. Venus looks like the biblical description of Hades. There's no water anywhere. Instead, the entire planet is covered with lava flows. It does rain sometimes, but the rain isn't water. It's sulfuric acid. Also, Venus seems to have no tectonic plates. The Earth's crust is made up of many plates, but Venus's isn't. Venus has no magnetic field either, while the Earth does. If evolution says the planets are supposed to be so much alike, then why are they so different? For that matter, why doesn't Venus have a moon? Later in this video, we'll talk about how the Earth supposedly got its moon. For now, we'll ask, if both planets really did form at the same time, by the same processes, from the same materials, and at about the same place, why doesn't Venus have a moon too? Well, an evolutionary theory explains this. Supposedly, Venus did have a moon initially, as evolutionary models would expect, but then something happened. Yes, that's right. An asteroid came along and hit it, and destroyed Venus's moon. Where's the evidence for this, though? There isn't any. Only that if it didn't happen, Venus would pose problems for evolutionary theory. Venus poses other huge problems for evolution as well. For example, Venus's surface appears quite young. The entire surface appears to be fresh. There's no record anywhere of billions of years of erosion or chemical weathering. Evolutionists are forced to speculate that somehow, for some unknown reason, the entire planet was resurfaced by volcanic activity not that long ago. This means the entire planet's crust would be submerged under lava all at the same time. Why did this happen? Nobody knows. How did this happen? Nobody knows that either. But it must have happened, they say, because we know evolution is true. How long ago did this event supposedly happen? Most planetary scientists believe Venus was resurfaced about 500 million years ago. They believe this because Venus has about 1,000 large impact craters on its surface, and it would take 500 million years or so to accumulate this many craters. So even though they admit Venus's surface looks young, they will insist that it's at least 500 million years old. But they're making two big assumptions here. Number one, they're assuming they know how often new craters form today. And number two, they're assuming this rate has been the same for at least 500 million years. However, both of these assumptions have been shown to be invalid. Studies on our moon and elsewhere in the solar system have shown that the evolutionary cratering model is wrong. We'll talk more about that later in this video. We see then that even though evolutionists insist Venus is old, all the evidence we have makes it look quite young. So here's what you aren't being told about Venus. Evolution says it should be similar to Earth, but it has no moon, no magnetic field, and its crust and its surface are very different than Earth's. Its surface is young and fresh, and Venus is perfectly consistent with a solar system that's only thousands of years old, not billions. The Earth is obviously very special to us. It's our home. Evolutionists tell us that our home has been here for about 4.5 billion years. But there's a lot of evidence that says this can't be true, that the Earth was created just a few thousand years ago, as the Bible says. In fact, there's enough evidence to fill multiple videos like this one. So a later video in this series will focus exclusively on the age of the Earth. For now, we'll have to reluctantly set this topic aside and move on. Let's talk instead about the Earth as a planet. Other than its age, does it match evolutionary theories? No, in many ways it doesn't. First of all, Earth's magnetic field causes all sorts of problems for evolution. Our magnetic field looks sort of like the field that would be generated if there was a giant bar magnet inside the Earth. Of course, there is no bar magnet inside of our planet. So where does the field come from? We've already discussed how magnetic fields are supposedly generated by fluid motions inside the planets. We've also discussed how this idea doesn't necessarily work, especially for Mercury. Well, it's hard to make it work for the Earth too, even though the Earth is the planet it was invented to explain. The American Geophysical Union website quotes a study that says this: "The mechanism for generating the geomagnetic field remains one of the central unsolved problems in geoscience." An even bigger problem, though, is that our magnetic field is decaying. For as long as we've been measuring it, its energy has fallen continuously. It loses half its energy about every 1,400 years or so. Now, you might have heard that the Earth's magnetic field has flipped in the past, that north and south magnetic poles have swapped. That's true, but it's not what we're talking about here. We aren't talking about the strength of the field at any one place on the Earth. We're talking about all the energy in the field overall, and that energy is fading fast. Since it's getting weaker over time, this means it was stronger in the past. If you could travel backwards in time, the field would double its energy every 1,400 years you traveled. Of course, there's a definite limit on how strong it could possibly have been. It turns out that the Earth's magnetic field could only be tens of thousands of years old at the most, not thousands of millions. Oh, and evolutionary dynamo theories can't explain any of this, of course. That's why one evolutionist recently wrote, "Magnetism is almost as much of a puzzle now as it was when William Gilbert wrote his classic text concerning magnetism, magnetic bodies, and the great magnet Earth in 1600. So, despite 400 years of research, evolutionists can't figure out how the Earth could possibly have a magnetic field. Maybe we should just accept that our planet was created? In fact, our planet looks like it was created especially for us. The Earth is uniquely designed to be our home. First of all, the magnetic field that evolutionists can't explain has a very important function. It protects us from solar radiation, which would quickly kill life on Earth otherwise. Charged particles from the sun are deflected around and behind us instead. Not only that, our atmosphere nurtures us and gives us air to breathe. A thicker atmosphere, or one with a different composition, could produce a massive greenhouse effect instead. Next, the Earth rotates on its axis once every 24 hours. This again is a unique feature for us. If the Earth rotated too slowly, there would be extreme temperature changes on our planet. If it rotated too quickly, we would experience violent winds. But it rotates at just the right speed. Also, our planet's axis is tilted by 23.5 degrees. This gives us moderate seasons. Plus, the Earth's orbit is nice and circular. This gives us a stable climate. But none of this should surprise us. The Bible says in Isaiah 45:18 that God created the Earth for us to live here. "For thus says the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He has established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else." There's another very important feature of our home planet. 70% of its surface is covered in water. We don't appreciate just how much water there is here, but from certain angles, like this one, looking at the Pacific Ocean, it's hard to see any land at all. In fact, it's hard to even comprehend how much water is here. The ocean basins are miles deep in some places. Question: if you could raise the ocean bottoms up and squish all the mountains down so that the entire Earth's surface was perfectly smooth, then obviously the water in the oceans would spread out to cover the entire Earth. But how deep would this water be? The answer is over 1.5 miles. There's a tremendous amount of water here, more than enough to flood the entire planet if only the Earth's surface was a bit smoother. So next time you read in the Bible about Noah's flood, remember how much water there is. Skeptics often scoff and say, if there was a global flood, where did all the water go? Well, they can just go down to the ocean and look at it. It's still there. Even the Earth's mountains used to be underwater, as the evolutionists themselves admit. That's why we find marine fossils on mountaintops. But at the end of the flood, the ocean basin sank and the mountains rose. That's why there's dry land today for us to live on. Anyway, back to our discussion about water. All this water is vital to life. But did you know that evolutionary models say that this water shouldn't be here? Remember how we discussed that volatile gases couldn't condense in the inner solar system? The evolutionary model says they were blown outwards instead. Evolutionists say this is why the terrestrial planets are rocky, because lighter materials couldn't condense this close to the sun. Well, one of the things that shouldn't have condensed this close to the sun is water. Evolutionary models say that the Earth had to form with practically no water at all. Obviously, that's not what we see. Where did all this water come from? Well, evolutionists don't know. They used to claim that the Earth was bombarded with hundreds of millions of comets early in its history. Since comets are basically big dirty ice balls in space, they said this is where all our water came from. Unfortunately for evolution, this explanation doesn't work anymore. We've actually sent spacecraft to visit some comets recently and found out exactly what these things are made of. It turns out that comets do contain some water, but a lot of their ices are chemically different than the water we have on Earth. Comet ices have a lot more deuterium than evolutionists expected. Since deuterium is extremely rare on Earth, apparently our water didn't come from comets. Therefore, according to evolution, our planet should have very little water. Obviously, evolution is wrong. As a report in Science News recently said, there's one thing on which most geochemists and astronomers agree. The celestial pantry is now empty of a key ingredient in the recipe for Earth. So here's what you aren't being told about the Earth. It's uniquely designed for us to live here. Its rotation period, axial tilt, orbit, atmosphere, and many other things. There's plenty of water here for Noah's flood, but evolution says there shouldn't be any here at all. And the Earth's magnetic field can't be billions of years old.
Engines on. 5, 4, 3, 2. All engines running. Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff 49 minutes past the hour. Traffic reports the clock has started. The tower is clear.
The Apollo missions to the moon were probably the highlight of our entire space program so far. Thousands of people worked tirelessly for years so that 12 men could walk on the moon and return safely home. We've all seen the moon countless times. Often, we tend to take it for granted, and we don't appreciate its beauty. But there's much more to appreciate than just its beauty. Like the Earth, the moon was created and uniquely designed for us. First of all, the moon's gravity raises tides in the Earth's oceans. This is crucial to life on Earth. The moon's tides help to circulate ocean water, which prevents our oceans from becoming stagnant. This allows fish and other creatures to live there. The moon is at just the right distance for this. If it were much farther away, it wouldn't raise high enough tides. On the other hand, if it were much closer, the tides would be too high, and they would be harmful to us. But the moon was created for more than just tides. The Bible says the moon was created for signs and seasons for us here on Earth, and is uniquely positioned for this. As the moon goes around the Earth, it regularly passes between the Earth and the sun. When this happens, if you're at the right spot on the Earth, you can see an eclipse. Notice how the moon blocks out the sun exactly. The moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, but the sun is 400 times farther away than the moon. This makes these eclipses possible. As you see here, it also allows us to study parts of the sun's atmosphere, things that we couldn't see otherwise thanks to the sun's blinding light. A total eclipse is known to be one of the most awe-inspiring events in all of creation. Each time one occurs, people travel from all over the world to see it. There are well over 100 other moons in our solar system, yet none of them produce eclipses like this for the planets they orbit. Only our moon has the exact combination of size, position, and distance that produces these beautiful events. Except for the Earth itself, the moon is the most widely studied object in our solar system. It's the only other object that people have walked on. The moon has some fascinating lessons to teach us. The side of the moon that we see from Earth is dominated by several features. The large dark areas that you see here on the surface are called maria. These are believed to be large flows of hardened lava. Here's a closer look. Notice how the mare area is smooth and lower than the rugged highlands behind it. The maria are believed to be huge impact basins. Sometime during the moon's past, some large objects hit the moon, forming these huge basins. These impacts were so severe that they cracked the moon's crust, causing lava to ooze out and fill the basins in. This seems like a reasonable explanation so far, but here's a question. How much time passed between the impacts and the lava coming out? It seems obvious that this wouldn't have taken long at all. A few hours, a few days, maybe as long as a week or two. But evolutionists believe that 500 million years passed in between the impacts and the lava. Why do they believe this? Because in many places on the moon, we can see things called ghost craters. Ghost craters are craters that are sticking up from underneath the maria. They have been partially filled in by lava, but not completely erased. That's why we can still see them. Here's another example. Notice that some craters are sharp and clear. These obviously formed after the lava filled in the maria, so these are not ghost craters. The ghost craters are the ones, like these, that are peeking up from underneath the hardened lava. These craters existed on the floors of the impact basins before the lava came and partially filled them. This means they formed after the giant impacts happened, but before the lava came out from the impacts. Here's why this is important. Because evolutionists believe in billions of years, they have concluded that, except for a short period early in the solar system's history, new craters form very slowly. Otherwise, there would be a lot more craters on the moon's maria, for example. But there are a lot of ghost craters on the moon. Since evolutionists have to believe in a slow rate of cratering, they're forced to believe that it took a good 500 million years or so for all these ghost craters to form. Does this idea make sense? No, it doesn't. Obviously, such huge impacts would have had an effect on the moon immediately. It's ridiculous to think that the moon would wait a 500 million years or so before it reacted to these collisions. The only reason evolutionists believe this is because they're committed to their billions of years. But if we look at the evidence without being influenced by evolutionary prejudices, what do we see? We see evidence that cratering rates used to be a lot higher in the past than today. And this affects our understanding of planets and moons all over the solar system. We talked about this during our look at Venus. Remember, Venus's surface looks very young, but evolutionists say it's at least 500 million years old, because cratering is such a slow process. Our moon shows us that cratering is not such a slow process as evolutionists believe, and that means the planets and moons in our solar system are a lot younger than you're being told. As we look at the moon, many people have wondered, how did the moon get here? Where did it come from? Well, the Bible tells us clearly where it came from. It was created on day 4 of Creation Week. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day. The moon was made to mark out times and seasons and to rule the night. Indeed, it is the dominant light in the nighttime sky. But evolutionists don't want to accept creation, so they look for other answers. In fact, evolutionists were very excited about the Apollo moon program back in the 1960s for just this reason. They thought that the lunar missions would help them understand how the moon could have formed all by itself, without a creator being involved. This is Apollo 17 astronaut Harrison Schmitt. He was not only the last astronaut to walk on the moon, he was also a PhD geologist as well. Schmitt and the other astronauts gathered samples from the moon's surface and brought back hundreds of pounds of moon rocks with them. These rocks revealed some very interesting things about the moon. At the time, there were 3 main evolutionary theories for the origin of the moon. Evolutionary scientists were eager to analyze the moon rocks and see which of their theories was right. The 3 theories were the fission theory, the nebula theory, and the capture theory. Let's talk about each one. The fission theory said that the early Earth was spinning very rapidly. Then a chunk of material tore off and became the moon. This theory had problems, though. Tests showed that lunar rocks are different than Earth rocks in some important ways. For example, the moon is deficient in iron when compared to the Earth. Also, if this idea was true, the Earth would have been spinning incredibly quickly. It would have been rotating just once every 2.5 hours or so. Problem: how did it slow down to today's speed of once every 24 hours? All that excess spin energy would have had to have gone somewhere. Calculations showed that this amount of energy would have been enough to raise the temperature of the entire Earth by 1,000 degrees Celsius. This would have boiled away all the Earth's oceans. Therefore, since we still have oceans today, we know this theory is wrong. The nebula theory said that the Earth and Moon formed out of a swirling cloud of gas and dust. This is just like the overall evolutionary theory for our solar system, with the gas turning into planets, but just on a smaller scale. The problem here is that this meant the Earth and the Moon were formed from the same stuff, and the Apollo missions showed that Moon rocks are different than Earth rocks. There are also real problems in getting the Earth and Moon to form from a cloud like that. The third theory was the capture theory. This says that the Moon formed elsewhere in our solar system and was traveling along one day when it passed too close to the Earth. The Earth's gravity pulled it in, where it took up housekeeping and started orbiting our planet where it is today. There are several problems with this idea. The biggest one is that one object can't capture another one gravitationally like this, not without interacting with other objects too. If it were just the Moon approaching the Earth, then the Earth's gravity would have accelerated the Moon on the way in. By the time the Moon arrived, it would be going too fast to stay in orbit. So there would only be two options. Either the Moon would hit the Earth, or else it would zoom on by and get flung away on the other side. Either way, you don't get an orbit. So, the Apollo missions left evolutionists in a turmoil. It's interesting to read their debates from the time. None of the evolutionists could really argue, well, my theory is right, because each theory had fatal flaws. Instead, they all said, well, it can't be any of those theories because they're obviously wrong. So in a sense, they were all right, because they were indeed all wrong. A few years after the Apollo missions ended, a NASA publication said this: in spite of everything that we have learned during the last few years, we still cannot decide between these three theories. We still need more data and perhaps some new theories before the origin of the Moon is settled to everyone's satisfaction. What does it mean when you have several theories already, but you need some new ones? It means the ones you have are wrong. So evolutionists needed something new. Sure enough, a new theory soon came to the rescue. Yep, it's those asteroids again. You see, billions of years ago, a really big asteroid, one the size of Mars, crashed into the Earth. Both the asteroid and the Earth were broken up in this catastrophe. Lots of material was sprayed out into space. Some of it formed into the Moon, and the rest of it came back down, back into the Earth. However, the iron from both bodies sank into the Earth's core, so this explains why the Moon doesn't have much iron today. So how good is this theory? Well, the media will tell you that computer simulations have proven it to be true, but that's nonsense. First of all, computer simulations can never prove anything happened, only that it's one possibility for how something might have happened. Secondly, this model only works with very narrow parameters. You need an asteroid of exactly the right size, coming in at exactly the right speed, and exactly the right angle for this to be even possible. And there's lots of debate about whether or not it works even within these narrow boundaries. Even many evolutionists don't accept this model. For example, one evolutionary astrophysicist has complained, the collision has to be implausibly gentle. You practically need someone to hold a Mars-sized object just above Earth and drop it to avoid messing up Earth's orbit. Not only that, scientists recently took a closer look at some of the soil samples that astronauts brought back from the Moon. They discovered that some of the samples contained water. This was a complete shock to evolutionists, because the giant impact theory says that the Moon can't have any water today. It would have been vaporized and lost during the collision. As one scientist commented, it's hard to imagine a scenario in which a giant impact melts completely the Moon, and at the same time allows it to hold on to its water. That's a really, really difficult knot to untie. Thanks to this new discovery, the giant impact hypothesis is in serious trouble. And that was the only idea that was remotely possible for an evolutionary origin of our Moon. Sounds like evolution can't explain where the Moon came from. The Bible was right, all along. This shouldn't have surprised anyone, though. All along, there's been a lot of evidence that the Moon can't be billions of years old. For example, this is the Aristarchus Plateau. This is one of many locations on the Moon that have been controversial for a long time. For centuries, people have seen flashes and temporary glows of light in these locations. These events don't last long, so it's been very difficult to photograph them. But we have written accounts of them going back to the 1500s. It seems that the Moon is still geologically active, releasing gas from volcanic vents. This is the Eratosthenes crater, another location where unusual sightings have occurred. Evolutionists have rejected all these sightings as nonsense. In their models, the Moon's volcanic activity stopped about 3.2 billion years ago. The Moon is old, cold, and dead. It can't be geologically active, or so they've always said. Finally, though, all the accumulating evidence became too much. In 1968, NASA released its chronological catalog of reported lunar events. This report listed 579 separate sightings of anomalous events on the moon. A couple of years later, the Apollo 15 mission even measured radon gas coming from the Aristarchus crater. Apparently, the moon is still geologically active. This makes perfect sense if it was only a few thousand years old. It's not old, cold, and dead, after all. The funny thing is, for the most part, evolutionists still won't admit any of this. In 2006, a study was published that said, well, we used to think that all geological activity stopped there 3.2 billion years ago, but now we admit we were wrong. It continued until 10 million years ago. They just have to stick with the millions of years. They just can't admit that the moon is young, and that its geological activity is still going on today. After all, if the moon was young, then the Bible would be right, and they don't want that. There's still one final problem with the evolutionist model that we haven't discussed yet. When our astronauts went to the moon, they brought lots of experiments with them. One of those experiments was called LLR, or Lunar Laser Ranging. These were special mirrors that the astronauts left behind on the moon. These are the locations where the Apollo missions landed. Apollo 11, 14, and 15 were the 3 missions that left behind the LLR reflectors. The reflectors look like this. Scientists on the Earth can fire a laser at one of these reflectors, and if the laser hits the target directly, which is really hard to do, as you can imagine, but they are able to do this, then the laser bounces back to Earth. Scientists then measure how long the light took to return, and then they figure out exactly how far away the moon is from us. This is still being done today, by the way. It's the only Apollo experiment that's still going on. Here's why this is important. Scientists have discovered that the moon is moving further away from us every year. This was already suspected before Apollo, but now we've been able to measure it. So why is this happening? It's because the moon is raising ocean tides on the Earth. This causes our ocean to bulge towards the moon. However, the Earth is spinning underneath the bulge and pulling it forward. The bulge itself then exerts a gravitational pull on the moon, which accelerates it and moves it outward in its orbit. That's a complicated process, but don't worry about the details. The important part is this. The moon is moving away from the Earth at about 3.8 centimeters per year. That's about 1.5 inches each year. We've measured this for years, and we know exactly why it's happening. 1.5 inches per year doesn't sound like much, but the way this works, it would have been receding faster in the past. Looking backwards in time, the moon would have been much closer to the Earth than today. In fact, calculations show that the moon would have been touching the Earth only 1.5 billion years ago. Obviously, this is impossible. Obviously, the moon can't have been orbiting the Earth for 4 billion years, as evolutionists claim. By the way, I should mention that evolutionists have been trying to solve this problem. There are some articles floating around on the internet that say this isn't a problem for evolution anymore. But those articles are wrong. If you're curious why, you can go to www.creationastronomy.com for details. So here's what you're not being told about the moon. Evolution can't explain why it's there. Evolution can't explain why it's still geologically active. And evolution can't explain how it could be receding for billions of years. What the Bible says about the moon is true. The moon is young and designed just for us. Mars is the 4th planet from the Sun. We first landed a spacecraft on it successfully in 1976. Since then, we've sent many other probes and have learned a lot about the red planet. Mars has turned out to be a rocky desert. Even though it's much smaller than the Earth, it has some very dramatic terrain. This is Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system. It's about the same size as the state of Arizona. Mars also has the largest canyon in the entire solar system. This is the Mariner Valley, or Valles Marineris. This enormous rift valley is as long as the continental United States. It's over 9 times as long as the Grand Canyon, about 7 times as wide, and 4 times as deep. It's almost as deep as Mount Everest is high. Mars is probably the planet that's in the news most often. You've probably heard about all this evidence for water on Mars that keeps getting discovered. Some evolutionists even say large parts of Mars used to be flooded with water, maybe even the whole planet. Let's talk about that for a moment. Many formations on Mars look like they were formed by liquid water. There are chasms, gullies, layered deposits, shorelines, and other formations that flowing water can produce. There's also evidence for water geysers and other dramatic events. But Mars is a giant desert today. Sometimes it has dust storms that cover the entire planet. How could there have been flooding on Mars? Mars does actually have water on it today, but not in liquid form. For example, there's water vapor in the atmosphere. More importantly, Mars has a lot of water ice at the poles, and water is also frozen under the surface elsewhere on the planet. This would seem to be the source of at least some of the formations we've seen. For example, a volcano or some other event that heats up the surface sufficiently could melt the ice frozen into the surface and cause flooding. But how long could this liquid water last on the surface? Under current conditions, it can't last long at all. That's why Mars is so dry today. Mars has a very thin atmosphere. This means the boiling point of water is very low. Even though it's very cold on Mars, a puddle of water would evaporate away quickly. Despite all this, evolutionists speculate that Mars used to have huge oceans of liquid water, which lasted for hundreds of millions of years. Why? Because they want to find life on other planets, and they need liquid water to do it. They seem to think that finding life somewhere besides Earth would prove evolution. Well, that's absurd in multiple ways. First of all, water doesn't mean life. You need water for life, but you also need lots of other things, especially an intelligent designer who can create it all. Louis Pasteur already proved that life can arise from non-living chemicals, and that was over 150 years ago. Evolutionists need to update their scientific approach. Even if we did find life on other planets, that wouldn't prove evolution anyway. Evolution can't explain how life arose at all, anywhere. For example, one evolutionist wrote this: "More than 30 years of experimentation on the origin of life in the fields of chemical and molecular evolution have led to a better perception of the immensity of the problem of the origin of life on Earth, rather than to its solution. At present, all discussion on principal theories and experiments in the field either end in stalemate or in a confession of ignorance." Another evolutionist admitted this: "It is extremely improbable that proteins and nucleic acids, both of which are structurally complex, and both of which are required for life, by the way, arose spontaneously in the same place at the same time. Yet it also seems impossible to have one without the other. And so, at first glance, one might have to conclude that life could never, in fact, have originated by chemical means." I could give lots of other examples, but we don't have the time. My point is that evolution can't explain how life could have started without a creator. Yet evolutionists are always looking for life somewhere else, as if that would help them solve this problem. But finding life somewhere else would just increase the number of places where evolution can't explain it. Anyway, that's one of the main reasons evolutionists want to find evidence for water on Mars. Unfortunately for them, as I mentioned before, liquid water is impossible on Mars today. But evolutionists want a history of water there really, really badly. This creates a huge problem. And where there's a problem, you need a solution. Evolutionists believe that Mars used to have a thick atmosphere, like they want. But then an asteroid hit the planet and stripped it away. Let's think about this for a moment. Mars is a desert planet, where it's physically impossible to have water. But evolutionists desperately want water there. In fact, they want enough water to flood the whole planet. So they invoke this catastrophe for which there's no evidence. On the other hand, the Earth has lots of water, more than enough to drown the entire planet 1.5 miles deep. And the Bible confirms that all the land was underwater at the time of Noah's flood. Plus, there's lots of physical evidence for a global flood on our planet. But evolutionists mock us for accepting the biblical account. They say that believing in a catastrophe is unscientific. Do you see the hypocrisy here? This is a vital point. In this video, you'll see that evolutionists invoke catastrophes over and over again to fill in the gaps in their models. And to be fair, it's possible that catastrophes have played a role in shaping the planets and moons in our solar system. After all, the Bible doesn't tell us much about the history of these objects, so we can't be dogmatic about what did or didn't happen to them in the past. Nevertheless, there's usually little evidence for any of the collisions invoked by the evolutionists. In the history of the entire solar system, there's only one catastrophe that we know for sure occurred, a global flood here on Earth. And this one catastrophe, the only one with overwhelming evidence from geology, history, and the Word of God itself, this catastrophe, the evolutionists reject absolutely. That's why in this video I'm emphasizing how often the evolutionists use asteroid collisions to rescue their models from the facts. Again and again, they invoke speculative catastrophes all over the solar system, but then they ridicule creationary scientists for using a well-supported catastrophe to interpret geological formations on Earth. And Mars is a perfect example of this inconsistency. Evolutionists are demanding watery catastrophes on Mars, where there can be no water today. Yet they mock creationists for believing in a watery catastrophe on Earth, which is covered with water today. As I said, this is utter hypocrisy. Mars is also an excellent illustration of the rank speculation that is passed off as science today. For example, perhaps the preeminent scientific journal in the world today is Nature. Nature recently ran an article with this headline: Wheel of Spirit hints at life on Mars. The Spirit being referred to here is a small rover that we landed on Mars. So if all you saw was this headline, you'd think, wow, Spirit found evidence for life on Mars. But what exactly did Spirit find? Only a little patch of sandy material, which might be silica, which might have formed from a volcanic fumarole. And on Earth, volcanic fumaroles sometimes have bacteria in them. Bingo! We found evidence for life on Mars. Isn't this absurd? A patch of sand somehow becomes hints of life on Mars. If a creationary scientist said something half this silly, he'd be mocked and ridiculed. But evolutionary believers do this sort of thing all the time. They often come up with wild speculations, which are presented as scientific fact. Remember this the next time you hear a news story about evidence for water, or even life, on Mars, or about all the evidence we have for evolution here on Earth. Try to find out what the evidence really is. It's often a lot less persuasive than they say. So here's what you aren't being told about Mars. Evolutionists want a long history of global oceans on Mars, but it's physically impossible for liquid water to exist on Mars today. The evolutionist view of Mars reveals the hypocrisy of their approach. And Mars is a good example of the wild evolutionary speculations that are passed off as science today. Jupiter is sometimes called the king of the planets. It's the largest planet in our solar system. Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune are giants too. They're all much bigger than the Earth, as you can see. But Jupiter is by far the biggest. Jupiter has beautiful, intricate clouds swirling over its entire surface. It also has a famous feature called the Great Red Spot. The red spot is a huge storm system swirling on Jupiter. This has existed for about as long as we've had telescopes to look at it, so it's hundreds of years old at least. It might even have been there since Jupiter was created, for all we know. As you can see, this one storm is bigger than the entire Earth. Jupiter also has huge electrical storms on its surface. Jupiter is a violent place. Just like all the other planets, Jupiter confounds evolutionary models of our solar system. For one thing, evolution says Jupiter can't be spinning as fast as it is. The evolutionary model makes certain predictions about how fast the planets will spin. However, Jupiter exceeds those predictions. One recent article quoted an evolutionist who has studied this problem. He said, "We came to the conclusion that if you accrete planets from a uniform disk of planetesimals, prograde rotation just can't be explained. The simulated bombardment leaves a growing planet spinning once a week at most, not once a day." This is a huge problem for evolution. Jupiter is not only the biggest planet in the solar system, it's also spinning the fastest. It spins all the way around on its axis in only 10 hours. How much energy do you need to spin up a planet this big to make it go this fast? The energy is enormous, and evolutionary models can't supply it. Scientists have also been studying the chemical composition of Jupiter. We've had several space probes fly close by it lately, and the results have surprised evolutionists. Evolutionary models predicted that Jupiter would lack certain elements: argon, krypton, xenon, nitrogen, and others. but it turns out that Jupiter has lots of these elements. The results of this study were published in the scientific journal Nature. An overview of that article said, Jupiter is the largest of all the planets, but results in Nature now reveal the embarrassing fact that we know next to nothing about how or where it formed. Also, the evolutionary model requires Jupiter to have a large core inside of it. This would have been necessary for Jupiter to form from the solar nebula billions of years ago. Unfortunately for evolution, a recent space probe measured the mass of Jupiter's core. The evolutionary model needs Jupiter to have a large core, at least 10 times the mass of our Earth. But we now know that at most, the core can only be 3 times the mass of Earth. It might even be smaller than this. In fact, the probe couldn't even confirm that Jupiter has a core at all. Jupiter does not match evolution's predictions. And even then, we're still not finished listing evolution's problems with Jupiter. Scientists have studied how a planet like Jupiter would have formed from a disk of gas and dust, and the results have been devastating for the evolutionary model. Jupiter would have needed at least 10 million years to form, and that's being generous. Some scientists say it would take even longer than that. But these scientists also acknowledge that a disk of gas and dust wouldn't have lasted around our sun for that long. Many scientists believe that such a disk would have dissipated in less than 5 million years. This means that in the evolutionary model, Jupiter would have had no time to form. So, according to evolution, Jupiter shouldn't exist at all. The more we've studied Jupiter, the more evolutionists have realized it doesn't fit into their models. One recent report said this, "Talk about a major embarrassment for planetary scientists. There, blazing away in the late evening sky, are Jupiter and Saturn, the gas giants that account for 93% of the solar system's planetary mass, and no one has a satisfying explanation of how they were made." Well, that last part isn't true. The Bible has a very satisfying explanation of how they were made. But now that evolutionists have rejected the Bible, their only explanation for these planets is lots of shoulder shrugging. Jupiter has over 60 moons. They pose problems for evolution too. Let's take a look at the 4 biggest ones. From upper left clockwise, we have Io, Europa, Callisto, and Ganymede. Ganymede is the largest of Jupiter's moons. It's even bigger than the planet Mercury. Ganymede has one of the most bizarre surfaces in our entire solar system. It's crisscrossed with ridges and grooved terrain, but with weird patterns streaking across it all. Some places are rough and rocky. Other places are flat and smooth. It almost looks like somebody took a giant paintbrush and painted huge swipes across the surface. But this isn't the only challenge Ganymede poses for people who try to explain how it formed without a creator. Evolutionary models predicted that Ganymede couldn't have a magnetic field. But when our space probes arrived and started taking measurements, we found that it does have a magnetic field. Ganymede doesn't match the evolutionary model at all. Then there's Callisto. This moon is the most heavily cratered object in the solar system. Evolutionists believe that it has one of the oldest surfaces of any object, about 4 billion years old. It was a real surprise then when our space probes took some close-up pictures. Evolutionists expected a large number of smaller craters to go with the big ones, but they aren't there. They should be there if the surface is really billions of years old, but they're not. Callisto doesn't match the evolutionary cratering model. Not only that, some of the pictures show what appears to be fresh ice on Callisto's surface. This means that there's still erosion and geological activity going on. Evolutionary models say that Callisto is old, cold, and dead, but apparently that's not true. Next, there's Europa. Europa is in some ways the opposite of Callisto. Callisto is the most heavily cratered object in the solar system. Europa is the smoothest. Not only are there very few craters, Europa has very little terrain of any kind. It's almost perfectly smooth. The entire moon is covered with a shell of ice. The ice is several miles thick, but some scientists believe there might be liquid water beneath it. And where there's water, there has to be life, right? We already talked about how ridiculous that idea is, but nevertheless, you still hear it in the news a lot. Somebody finds a new crack on Europa and thinks, ooh, look, water might ooze up into the crack, and there might be life evolving in the water. Then some reporter runs a story about it that says we're on the verge of finding life elsewhere in the solar system, even though all we found was a crack in the moon. That sounds ridiculous, but it happens a lot in astronomy, unfortunately. Because Europa has only a few craters, we've been able to study them closely. One recent study has shown that the evolutionary model for cratering is all wrong. We've talked about cratering before. We've seen that evolutionists like to use craters to date things in the solar system. After all, the more craters something has, the longer it's been sitting there getting struck by other objects. Well, this study discovered that the impact of just one object can throw up debris and form lots and lots of craters. Scientists had already known this was possible, but evolutionists didn't expect the effect to be this large. The study showed that up to 95% of small craters and a lot of the medium ones were formed in this way. This means that these planets and moons have been struck with a lot fewer impacts than evolutionists thought. And that calls into question all those billions of years that these objects have supposedly been around. Remember that Venus's surface looks very young, but its crater supposedly proved is 500 million years old? Now we know this isn't true. And craters are also used to support an old age for the Earth's moon. Supposedly, our moon needed billions of years to accumulate all of its craters. Thanks to Europa, we now know this isn't true. The scientists in this study specifically said the Europa results caused problems for the current accepted age of Earth's moon. Isn't it interesting that one small moon of Jupiter, so far away from us, can wreck evolutionary models of even our own moon? The last moon of Jupiter that we'll be discussing is Io. Compared to Jupiter, Io is an insignificant little speck of a moon. But it's turned out to be one of the most spectacular places in the solar system. Io's surface is covered with volcanoes. All the spots you see on its surface here are volcanic. Over 400 volcanoes have been counted on Io, and at least 150 of them are active today. The black spot you see here is a volcano named Loki. It's more powerful than all the Earth's volcanoes combined. Volcanoes in Io can be incredibly violent. We've seen fountains of lava blasting material 180 miles into space. We've also measured geysers of lava shooting out of the volcanoes at over 2,000 miles per hour. That's more than 10 times as fast as the most violent volcanoes here on Earth. Io gives us some fascinating insights on the long-age evolutionary theories. For example, Io puts out twice as much heat as the Earth does. Where does all this heat come from? Well, some of it comes from tidal flexing. Io is caught in a gravitational tug-of-war between Jupiter on the one side and Jupiter's other large moons on the other. They're both pulling on Io, and this squeezing and flexing is generating heat inside Io's interior. The problem is that this squeezing can only account for some of Io's heat. So where does the rest of the heat come from? Well, if Io is young, it could still be cooling off from its initial formation. But if it's really billions of years old, that energy would have dissipated long ago. So, according to evolutionary theory, Io shouldn't have all those active volcanoes you see on its surface. But it does. Io's volcanoes create another problem for the models with billions of years. We've measured the lavas coming from the volcanoes, and there's an amazing amount of it. The Amirani volcano alone, which you see here, is flooding the moon's surface with 100 cubic meters of lava per second. It's erupting like that continuously, and this isn't even the biggest volcano on Io. For example, look at these before and after pictures of the Pulan Patera. Between the times these photos were taken, there was a massive eruption that produced the dark spot you see on the upper right. That's a huge lava flow, about as big as the state of Nevada, and these flows happen quickly. We saw a different volcano produce almost this much lava in just 2 days. Has Io really been erupting like this for 4.5 billion years? We've measured some of these flows coming out of these volcanoes, and it's a huge amount of material. If Io really was 4.5 billion years old, it would have recycled itself through its own volcanoes over 30 times. Surely Io can't be billions of years old. And there's another problem too. We've studied volcanoes on Earth, and the lavas here reach amazing temperatures, 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At least these temperatures seemed amazing until we examined Io. Evolutionists were flabbergasted with the discovery that some of the lavas on Io are almost 1,000 degrees hotter than Earth lavas. They're also very dense. So here's the problem for evolution. If Io really was billions of years old, these temperatures and densities wouldn't be possible. After the first few million years, Io should have formed a low-density crust, after all the higher-density material sank down to the inside. But there are still high-density materials on the surface. Forget about billions of years. Io apparently isn't even millions of years old. Io looks quite young. it matches perfectly with the biblical account of creation just a few thousand years ago. And that brings us to the end of our discussion on Jupiter. So let's review. Here's what you're not being told about Jupiter and its moons. According to evolution, Jupiter can't be spinning as fast as it is. According to evolution, Jupiter can't be made up of the material it's made up of. According to evolution, there wasn't enough time for Jupiter to even form. Ganymede shouldn't have a magnetic field, but it does. Callisto shouldn't be geologically active, but it is. Europa shows that long-age crater counting methods are wrong, and Io looks very young. Evolutionary models fail utterly to explain Jupiter. That's why evolutionists make complaints like this one. Building Jupiter has long been a problem for theorists. Or this one. I don't think the existence of Jupiter would be predicted if it weren't observed. So why do they still cling to a broken model? Because when you reject the truth, you have to accept a lie. Pity the poor evolutionist who is so committed to a bankrupt theory that he can't see the hand of his creator in this majestic planet. Saturn's rings are one of the most famous sights in all of astronomy. The rings look solid, but they're not. They're actually made up of millions of particles, all orbiting Saturn together. The particles are mostly ice and dirt. Some are as small as grains of dust, others are large boulders. The rings are also razor thin compared to Saturn's bulk. This series of pictures was taken as the Cassini spacecraft moved from below the rings to above them. You can see how thin the rings are. When you compare their width to their thickness, it's about the same as a sheet of paper that's as wide as the city of San Francisco. Oh, and that little guy you saw shooting across the top was one of Saturn's moons. We'll talk about a couple of those in just a few minutes. Saturn's rings are mysterious. They're more than just belts of particles orbiting the planet. For example, there are spokes in them, as you see here. Some of them are even braided. Nobody expected these features in the rings, and some of them are still a puzzle. It's as if somebody created them just to delight and fascinate us. So how did the rings get there? I believe they were created at the same time Saturn was, a few thousand years ago. Of course, evolutionists won't accept this. Here's what a NASA scientist